What if every scalpel was a harbinger of death, not healing? Would you still crave the title of surgeon in an era where blood and horror danced hand in hand? Medieval surgery was not a sanctum of science but a stage for carnage, where the blessed art of healing transformed into a bloodbath of reckless ambition and ignorance. In this world, the only thing sharper than your instruments was the thin line between life and a grotesque finale. Picture this: a room dimly lit by flickering candles, the air thick with the stench of rot and desperation. The patient lies on a rickety table, bound and terrified, eyes wide in disbelief. You're not a healer, you're a butcher in a blood-soaked apron, wielding a tool that doubles as a weapon. An amputation? Just another day. Save a life? A gamble at best. Every slice sends shivers through your spine. Will it be a miracle or a massacre? The stakes? What's a limb compared to a soul? Every cut you make feels like a high-stakes poker game, except the chips are soaked in crimson, and the stakes are life itself. Who needs anesthesia when you have a good sense of humor and a gallon of ale? Pain? Just a detail in a world where the only universal language is agony. You can hear the echoes of medieval laughter, a twisted soundtrack to the symphony of screams that punctuate the air. With this knife, I can save you or send you straight to hell, you might joke, but the truth is, most patients would prefer the latter over what awaits. Ever heard of trepanation? Welcome to the medieval equivalent of flipping a coin to decide who lives and who dies. Drill into the skull and hope it's a headache you cure rather than a funeral you preside over. The ancient belief? The brain was a vessel of humors, a gory science that blurs the lines between the enlightened and the deranged. You might as well throw a dart at the anatomy chart and hope for the best. Underneath the blood-streaked robes lies a secret even darker than the dank halls of the operating table. Every surgeon knew the risks, but ambition, like a blade, cuts both ways. You could be the hero or the villain in a tale steeped in tragedy. Surgeons were celebrated and cursed in the same breath, a paradox wrapped in a riddle, where every success was a mad stroke of luck. Still curious? What price would you pay for glory? A hand? A life? Your sanity? The medieval surgeon was a ghost, haunting the fringes of society, his laughter echoing in shadows while the townsfolk whispered tales of his gruesome triumphs and failures. Beneath the blood-soaked surface lies a truth so enticing yet horrifying: the knife may not be the most dangerous weapon in the medieval operating theatre. It's the lurking madness within those who wield it, the sick thrill that promises salvation while dancing with death. Welcome to a world where every heartbeat could be your last, and every incision unfurls a new web of secrets. Would you dare step into the shoes of a medieval surgeon? The choice, my friend, may cost you more than you're willing to lose. The dagger's blade glinted under the flickering torchlight, a cold promise of both salvation and torment. It pressed against the taut skin of the patient, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood and the pungent aroma of burning herbs. I remember the shouts, the desperate cries echoing through the small, damp chamber, a cacophony that rang in my ears, drowning out the muted whispers of my own thoughts. There he lay, a man brought low by the weight of an unseen enemy, his body trembling on the crude wooden table, a testament to the fragility of life. Henry, the barber surgeon, stood over him, hands shaking, nerves frayed. I watched as he gripped the handle of the blade, knuckles white, the sweat beading on his brow. Fear flickered in his eyes, a mirror to the terror of every soul who had ever dared to wield a knife in the name of healing. "This will hurt," he murmured, though it felt like more of a prayer than a warning. The patient, a peasant boy barely 16, swallowed hard, his gaze darting to the shadows. The corners of the room seemed to hold specters of despair, vestiges of every soul claimed by the grim reaper of negligence. I remember the silence that followed, an eerie pause before the storm. Time stretched, each heartbeat reverberating against the stone walls like a funeral dirge. And then, with a swift, deliberate motion, the dagger descended. The boy screamed, a sound that pierced through flesh and spirit, leaving echoes in the hearts of all present. It was a sound I would carry with me forever, a shuddering reminder of the razor-thin line between life and death. But then there was Agnes, the healer, with her wild, tangled hair that seemed to dance like shadows in the dim light. She was a woman of contradictions, soft-hearted yet fierce, compassionate yet haunted. I watched her, the way she moved among the herbs and poultices, a sorceress conjuring miracles from the earth itself. Her hands, calloused yet gentle, were capable of both mending flesh and breaking hearts. She leaned over the boy, whispering words of comfort, her voice steady amidst the chaos, a fragile thread of hope woven into the very fabric of despair. "You are not alone," she said, her eyes glistening like stars against the backdrop of ruin. Fight. But how could one fight against the spectre of infection? Against the gnawing dread that clung to us all like a shroud? The boy's fever mounted, the color of his cheeks draining, leaving him pallid and ghost-like, a glimpse of the afterlife lurking just beyond the veil. I felt Agnes' despair ripple through the air, a heavy anchor weighing her down. She grasped the boy's hand as if trying to tether him to the world, her own heart breaking with every pulse that diminished in strength. "Do you remember the stories?" she asked, her voice trembling, barely more than a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile illusion of hope. "The tales of brave knights and their battles." Her eyes searched the boy's, seeking a spark of recognition, of connection. "You will be a hero today. You will not fade." The boy blinked, a flicker of understanding, a glimmer of fight igniting in his feverish gaze. But I knew the truth, the walls were closing in. I could see the clock on the wall, its hands moving ever so slowly, mocking us with the passage of time. Each tick echoed with the weight of unspoken fears. Shadows danced in the corners, whispering of failed surgeries, ghosts of those who had come before, their stories woven into the very stones. We were caught in the web of their tragic endings, and I feared our thread would soon be cut. Henry leaned closer, sweat trickling down his temple as he prepared for the next cut. I remember the stories," he breathed, his voice a low growl of determination wrapped in uncertainty. He, too, was a victim of the times, a man caught between the desperate need to save lives and the darkness of his own inadequacies. Each patient was a reminder of his failures, each incision a potential descent into the abyss of regret. In that small, suffocating room, the air thick with dread, the weight of history pressed upon us. We were not just three souls tangled in this moment, we were the embodiment of an age that had yet to fully understand the sanctity of life, the power of healing, the grotesqueness of our own limitations. And yet, we fought on, against the odds, against our fears, against the very fabric of fate that seemed so determined to unravel our efforts. The boy screamed again, and the sound resonated deep within me, a haunting melody that would replay in my mind for years to come. I felt the pulse of time quicken, the world outside fading into a distant murmur as we stood on the precipice of life and death, suspended in an eternal moment of fear and hope. I glimpsed Agnes' tears glistening like dew on a spider's web, fragile and beautiful yet destined to fall. And then, just as quickly, the moment shattered. A surge of agony erupted from the boy, a visceral reminder of the cost of our endeavors. The darkness crept closer, and I knew we were teetering on the edge of a precipice that had been carved from centuries of struggle, from the marrow of a society that had yet to find the light in its darkest hours. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was something raw and beautiful in our desperation. It was the fight for survival, the refusal to succumb to the suffocating shadows that loomed over us. We were not mere characters in a story, we were living, breathing embodiments of the struggle for knowledge and compassion, for healing and redemption. In that cramped chamber, with the echoes of pain, the flickering torchlight, and the unyielding spectre of mortality, I realized that the origins of medieval surgery were not simply about incisions and blood. They were about courage, the courage to wield a blade, to face the unknown, to embrace the haunting echoes of the past while yearning for a brighter future. And so we remained, entangled in this moment, suspended between the despair of our history and the flickering hope of what lay ahead. A delicate balance, a dance with shadows that would never truly end. The story continued, the knife poised, the hearts racing, a relentless cycle of anguish and aspiration, of life and death, echoing through the annals of time. The room is thick with the smell of blood and herbs, a nauseating blend that twists the stomach and clings to the walls like a shadow. A candle flickers, its flame a desperate dance against the encroaching darkness, and in the corner, a figure trembles. Brother Anton, eyes wide like black marbles, clutches a scalpel, the metal glinting ominously as he stares down at the wounded man sprawled on the wooden table. The patient's breath is ragged, a haunting echo in the silence, and Anton feels the weight of the world pressing down on him, a weight he is not sure he can bear. "I remember when I thought healing was a divine gift," he whispers to himself, though the words seem to evaporate in the chaos. "I remember how naive I was." The door bursts open, and in rushes Johanna, the barber surgeon, her apron stained with the remnants of another life. Her hands tremble not from fear, but from the rush of adrenaline that coursed through her veins like wildfire. She's seen too much already, the horrors of war etched into her skin like the scars of those she has tried to save. "Brother," she gasps, her voice a strangled wail. "We have to do something, he's losing too much blood." But Anton is frozen, paralyzed by the weight of his own inadequacies. The light from the candle flickers, casting shadows that dance like phantoms, and he feels the room close in around him. "What do you want me to do?" he finally croaks, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "I am not a physician. I am but a monk who wanted to serve. Johanna interrupts, her eyes fierce and wild, filled with a determination that cuts through the fog of his despair. "You serve by saving him, Anton. You wield the blade, but you must also wield your heart." Heart. The word strikes him like a bell tolling in the distance, echoing through the corridors of his mind. He thinks of the vows he took, the promise to care for the sick and dying. But fear coils around him like a serpent, squeezing tighter, suffocating his will. "I remember the faces of the dying," he murmurs, the memory flooding back, their pleas, their desperation, the way death had lingered in the air like an unwelcome guest. "I remember their eyes, pleading for miracles that I could not perform." Suddenly, the man on the table convulses, a guttural cry tearing from his lips, and the sound slices through his reverie. Anton's heart races. He can't let this be the moment he falters. He steels himself, his hand shaking as he grips the scalpel, this tool of salvation and destruction. Johanna's voice breaks through, a lifeline in the storm. "Together, Anton! We fight together! You are not alone in this." And in that moment, Anton sees her, not just a barber surgeon with blood-stained hands, but a warrior forged in the fires of despair. He remembers her laughter, the way it filled the bleak corners of their world. "Life is absurd, isn't it?" she had said once, grinning after washing a bloody linen. "We bathe once a year, so yeah, romance is earthy. But we fight for every heartbeat." They lock eyes, a silent understanding passing between them, and the fear begins to dissipate, replaced by something more potent, resolve. "Let's save him," he breathes, the words igniting a fire within him. They move as one, an unexpected team forged in the heat of crisis, the monk and the barber surgeon, two souls bound together by the desperation of the moment and the fragile hope that flickers against the dark. Johanna guides him, her hands sure and steady as she directs him to press the wound, to staunch the flow of crimson life. "Hold him!" Johanna commands. The wounded man thrashes, agony etched in every line of his face, and Anton feels desperation claw at him. "You are a monk, Anton. You are not only here to pray, you are here to act." He seizes the man's shoulders, grounding him to the present, to the fight that rages around them. "Breathe," he implores, his voice a fierce whisper. "Breathe and hold on." But as the seconds tick by, the room becomes a coffin, time stretching and warping until it feels like an eternity. The candle burns low, the shadows growing, whispering secrets that chill the spine. Only Johanna's voice cuts through, fierce and unyielding. "We can save him. We must save him." Yet doubt slithers back, insidious, and Anton feels it coil around his heart once more. "What if we fail?" he murmurs, his voice almost lost in the cacophony of suffocating silence. "What if we do?" she shoots back, her fierce spirit igniting a spark within him. "He deserves this fight. We deserve to fight. Look at him, he's fighting for breath." And with that, Anton feels the pulse of life around him, the thrum of existence that refuses to bow to the hands of fate. In that moment, he understands, healing is not a gift, but a brutal battle against the inevitable. It's the heartbeat of every desperate soul, every flicker of hope clinging to life despite the odds. As they work, the air grows thick with the scent of iron and sweat, and the tension crackles like lightning. The candle falters, casting grotesque shadows that dance on the walls, but they are undeterred. Together, they fight against the tide, the fear intertwining with hope, creating a tapestry of raw humanity. Just a little more, Johanna urges, her voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos. The wounded man gasps, and for a moment, time collapses. Anton feels the weight of history behind him, the echoes of ancient healers, the whispers of monks who dared to dream of salvation. In that instant, he knows that healing is not a solitary act, it is a communion, a shared struggle against the dark. And as he grips the scalpel tighter, he embraces the absurdity of their existence, the laughter amidst the carnage, the love buried beneath layers of suffering. A grotesque symphony of life and death. The candle flickers, the shadows dance, and the fight rages on. In that dimly lit room, surrounded by uncertainty and pain, Anton finds his purpose, the lines of fear and courage blurring into one. They are not just practitioners of a craft, but warriors of the heart, battling against the very essence of despair. And with every heartbeat, the story evolves, weaving through time, echoing into the night, a relentless cycle that refuses to end. The air was thick with dread, palpable as the scent of human fear. In a dimly lit chamber, shadows danced against the walls, flickering like souls caught between worlds. Blood caked the floor, a dark testament to desperation and misunderstanding. In the corner, a figure hunched over a table, Aldrich, the village healer, his hands stained and trembling. He could feel the weight of every heartbeat in the room, each pulse a reminder of the lives teetering on the edge of oblivion. A body lay motionless, eyes wide, pupils dilated, Edith, his beloved wife. The breath caught in his throat like a blade, slicing through the rawness of the moment. "I remember the laughter," he whispered, each word a stab at the memory that haunted him. "I remember cooking together, the way your laughter danced in the air like sunlight. But now it is just shadows." The shadows, they consumed him. How had it come to this? Their love, once a bright flame, now flickered in the suffocating darkness of ignorance. He had thought he understood the body, how it worked, how to mend it. Galen's dusty texts lay scattered around him, the pages yellowed with time, filled with promises of knowledge and healing. But knowledge had turned to ash in his mouth, leaving only the bitter taste of failure. Beside him, a young apprentice, Jasper, stood frozen. His wide eyes reflected the chaos around him, innocence crushed beneath the weight of blood and bone. I thought herbs would help," he stammered, voice quaking. "I thought I knew, you thought." Aldrich snapped, his voice an angry thunder. "You knew nothing. We knew nothing." The darkness threatened to swallow them whole, and with each frantic heartbeat, the veil of understanding slipped further away. Edith's face haunted him, pale and lifeless, a canvas for every mistake they made. He had dismissed her cough as a mere chill, a passing ailment. But time had played them a cruel trick, wrapping itself around her throat like a noose. If only I had sought the surgeon instead of relying on old wives' tales," he murmured, the regret clawing at his insides. Jasper's hands trembled, fingers twitching like a dying spider trapped in the web of his own thoughts. "But the humors, what of the humors?" he blurted, desperation dripping from his voice. Perhaps she was just out of balance. Balance? Aldrich laughed, a harsh, hollow sound that echoed off the stone walls. "What balance does she have now? What good are your theories when standing in the face of death?" The weight of his words turned the air electric, charged with tension. Each breath felt like a betrayal, a grim reminder of the life slipping away. Outside, the village whispered tales of sorcery, of the healer who failed to save his own wife. They would call him a witch, a cursed man. The weight of their judgment loomed over him like a guillotine waiting to fall. He could feel their eyes, piercing through the walls of his soul, searching for a weakness, a crack in the facade. "Gather the herbs, we can try again," Jasper urged, but his voice trembled with uncertainty. The wildflowers that once danced in the meadows now seemed mocking, unreachable and untouchable. Aldrich shook his head, each movement heavy with the ache of reality. "No more herbs, Jasper. No more texts. We are out of time." Time. The very concept gnawed at Aldrich, a relentless beast that devoured hope. The clock hung on the wall like a cruel reminder of their impotence. Tick-tock, tick-tock, the rhythm drummed against his temples, a dirge for the living. "We are fools, children playing at healing," he said, throat raw. "We've turned to whispers in the dark, believing them to be truths." And yet, as he spoke, a flicker of something sparked in his heart, a desire to turn the tide, to reclaim the lost pieces of their lives, if only for a moment. "No," he said softly, "we will not be the fools of fate. We will bring her back." The silence that followed was deafening, a chasm filled with uncertainty and fear. Jasper's eyes widened, a mix of awe and horror. "But Aldrich, what can we do?" "What we must," Aldrich replied, steeling himself. "We will call the village, we will find a way." The thought sent a shiver through him. The village would gather, eyes filled with judgment, hearts heavy with suspicion. They would bear witness to a confrontation, an emotional climax that stood on the razor's edge of desperation and hope. The very idea was terrifying, yet thrilling. The weight of expectations pressed upon him like a shroud, but perhaps this was the moment of reckoning. "I remember the stories," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The tales of those who dared to cross the lines of life and death." With every word, the shadows shifted, the air crackling with the energy of the unknown. "Perhaps we can take a leap into the abyss, and pull her back." Jasper nodded, the fear in his eyes now tempered with a spark of determination. "Let's gather the villagers then. If they won't listen to us, perhaps they'll listen to the old legends," he said, clenching his fists as if ready to battle the darkness. Aldrich felt the shadows shift once more, the oppressive weight of misunderstanding still clinging to him. But as he turned toward the door, he felt the first stirrings of hope. It danced on the edge of possibility, fragile and trembling, yet undeniably alive. As they stepped into the night, the moon hung low, a ghostly spectre illuminating their path. The village loomed ahead, a labyrinth of flickering candles and wavering shadows. Fear threaded through the air like a spectre, but so too did the whispers of hope. Together, they crossed into the darkness, each step echoing with the charge of unspoken words. They would confront the misunderstanding, the myths that had led them astray. In that moment, they were not mere healers, they were warriors, armed with the knowledge of their failures, ready to challenge the very fabric of belief itself. The air thickened, charged with the promise of confrontation. And as they approached the gathering crowd, a dreadful stillness settled around them, amplifying the heartbeat of a world caught in the throes of misunderstanding. The room smelled of antiseptic and fear, a strange concoction that curled in the air like a predator stalking its prey. I stood frozen, heart pounding against my ribcage, as if trying to break free from my body, a vessel of terror. Shadows danced along the walls, flickering like the memories I could barely hold onto. In the center of it all, the surgical table glistened under harsh fluorescent lights, its metallic surface reflecting not just instruments, but the weight of every decision made, every life saved or lost. Dr. Lena Hartman stood there, her gaze locked on the patient, a young boy, barely 10. His small chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, a fragile rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of my own fears. I could see the tremor in her hands as she reached for the scalpel, a beautiful but deadly tool, gleaming ominously like a silver dagger poised to slice through not just flesh, but hope itself. The blade was sharp, but it was her doubt that cut deeper. I could feel the air grow thick with unspoken words, the kind that could choke a person, suffocate their resolve. "Are you ready, Lena?" I whispered, though I could barely recognize my own voice. She didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the boy, the way a moth is drawn to a flame, both knowing the potential for disaster, yet unable to pull away. I remembered when she had first mentioned her dream of being a surgeon. The excitement had glimmered in her eyes, a youthful spark that now felt like a cruel joke. What had we done to deserve this? In that moment, I felt the weight of her ambition, the crushing pressure of 1,000 unachievable expectations. I stood beside her, my hands trembling, not out of fear for the boy, but for her. "Lena, listen to me," I urged, my voice thick with urgency. "You don't have to do this alone." But she shifted her gaze, the weight of every choice pulling her deeper into the abyss of responsibility. The operating room felt less like a sanctuary of healing and more like a stage for tragedy, and we were all actors unwillingly trapped in our roles. Scalpel, she said, her voice steady, yet laced with unshakable fear. I handed it to her, the cool metal sending a jolt of dread through my veins. As she hovered over the boy, time felt warped, stretched thin like a spider's web about to snap. I could see her mind racing, the what-ifs tumbling forward like a tidal wave. What if she failed? What if the boy never woke up? What if, each thought a knife twisting in her conscience. I watched as she made the first incision, a delicate slice that reverberated through my entire being. The blood flowed, bright and stark against the white sheets. It was more than just a color, it was a reminder of the fragility of life, of how quickly it could slip through our fingers. I wanted to scream, to reach out and pull her back from the edge, but all I could do was stand there, paralyzed. Lena! My voice broke, a desperate plea wrapped in panic. Remember why you're doing this. But her focus remained unyielding, locked onto the task at hand. I could see the ghosts of her past whispering in her ear, doubts and failures curling around her like a dense fog. She was fighting not just for the boy, but for herself, the self she had sacrificed on the altar of ambition. With each cut, I saw her resolve waver, her hands trembling as the weight of the instrument seemed to grow heavier. The scalpel, once a symbol of her dreams, turned monstrous in her grasp. I thought of our conversations late into the night, how she had laughed at the absurdity of it all, surgery, a game of chance played with human lives. It's like playing God, she had said, her eyes alight with mischief. Except sometimes, he doesn't play fair. Her laughter echoed in my memory, a haunting reminder of innocence lost. As the minutes ticked by, the beeping of the monitors became a metronome for our fears. Each blip, each rise and fall of the boy's heart echoed like a clock counting down to a moment we couldn't escape. I felt the weight of Lena's choices suffocating us both. The sterile air grew thick with unspoken terror, twisting around us like barbed wire, each second a reminder of the danger we flirted with. Lena, you can stop, I implored, my heart breaking. It's okay to walk away. But she shook her head, a single tear cascading down her cheek, glistening like a fallen star. It isn't okay, she whispered, the weight of her voice anchoring us all in the storm. Not when I can save him. Yet I could see the storm inside her, a tempest of panic and despair. The instruments, those cold metal tools of the trade, glistened with a life of their own, ready to betray their wielder. Each one held a potential for salvation or destruction, a paradox of healing. I watched her hands move with calculated precision, yet in the back of my mind lurked the fear of error, of an unintended slip that could change everything. We were at the mercy of blades, scissors, clamps, a symphony of chaos conducted by fear. Lena, please, I pleaded, my voice a threadbare lifeline. Remember why you started this. But her eyes, filled with determination yet tinged with vulnerability, were locked in battle. This was her moment of truth, and I was merely a ghost haunting the edges, a constant reminder of the risks she took every day. Outside the operating room, the world continued, blissfully unaware of the chaos within. Families waited, hearts heavy with hope and dread, as they paced on the linoleum floor. Each tick of the clock echoed in my ears, a relentless reminder that time was the true enemy. Somewhere, I could hear a child's laughter, innocent and pure, a stark contrast to the despair we bore. Scissors, she said, her voice barely a whisper, and my heart shattered as I placed them into her trembling hand. How could something so mundane feel so monumental? With every snip, I felt the air grow heavier, thick with tension and the weight of unspoken fears. In that moment, the room became a crucible, testing our resolve, our limits, our very souls. And then, suddenly, the world shifted. The boy's heart rate dipped, an ominous lull that felt like the universe holding its breath. Lena's eyes widened, a reflection of the horror creeping in. No, 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 she gasped, her hands trembling as chaos threatened to rise. Every second stretched taut like a wire, ready to snap. Lena! I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. You have to believe. But the fear etched across her face was a mirror to my own. We were both trapped in a nightmare of our making, each breath more precious than the last. The instruments around us, once hopeful, now felt like instruments of fate, tools that could just as easily cut life as it could save it. The shadows in the room grew longer, whispers of fear curling around us like smoke, suffocating and relentless. The clock chimed, a cruel reminder that the line between life and death was paper-thin, an edge we danced upon precariously. I could see Lena's resolve faltering, the weight of the blade steeped in her sweat and sorrow. The boy lay there, an innocent victim caught in the crossfire of our choices. "Let him go," I whispered, a final breath of despair. But Lena shook her head, defiance igniting her spirit. "No. I can't." And in that moment, I understood her struggle. We were all surgeons in our own lives, wielding our choices with instruments of hope and despair, teetering on the edge of disaster. The tension bubbled, thick and sticky, as the minutes dragged on like hours. I felt the pulse of the room, a heartbeat that resonated with our fears, our doubts, our unyielding hope. Time slipped through our fingers, and as the boy's heart rate faltered once more, I braced myself for the inevitability of what was to come. The instruments lay poised, ready to cut deeper than skin. Each one bore witness to our choices, our fears, our triumphs and failures. In this sanctuary-turned battleground, the stakes had never been higher, the danger never more real. And as we hovered on the brink of salvation or tragedy, I knew that no matter the outcome, we were forever changed. In this realm of surgical tools, of instruments and their dangers, we were all players in a game where the lines blurred, where hope twisted with despair, and every cut, every stitch, was a reminder of the lives we sought to save. And as Lena took a deep breath, the world outside faded, leaving only the dance of shadows and light, the flicker of hope that somehow, against all odds, we would find our way home. The clock ticks. Each second a terrifying reminder of time slipping away, of reality closing in. Inside the sterile, white walls of the hospital room, the scent of antiseptic hangs heavy, suffocating. Sarah grips the edge of the bed, knuckles white, breaths shallow and rapid. The nurse's voice is a blur, a murmured mantra of reassurance that feels as distant as the stars. "You'll be okay. Just breathe." But how could she breathe when the weight of dread presses down on her chest like a leaden hand? I remember the night before, a soft rain tapping against the window, lulling me into a false sense of safety. I remember the way I thought this was just another routine procedure, just another day in the endless grind of life, until the moment everything shifted. Anxiety twists in my gut, a feral thing, clawing its way up into my throat. I remember the look in Sarah's eyes when the doctor finally told her, "We need to perform the surgery immediately." Her world shattered in that instant, fragments of trust and hope scattering like leaves in a storm. As the anesthesia drips slowly through the fore, I can see the flicker of panic dance behind her pupils. "What if I wake up?" she whispers, her voice a fragile thread. "What if I can't feel anything?" Each word is a knife, slicing through the thin veil of calm the staff tries to maintain. I watch as the nurse gently places a hand on Sarah's shoulder, a gesture meant to soothe, but it feels as though she's trying to hold back a tidal wave. And then there's Jacob, standing in the shadow of the doorway, a ghost in his own life. He clutches a crumpled tissue in his hand, the fabric soaked with unshed tears. "I just want you to wake up," he murmurs to the floor, the weight of his despair breaking him down, crumbling the man who once stood so strong beside her. He remembers the laughter they shared, the dreams they built, and now, stripped of all that, he faces the specter of losing her, a fate more haunting than death itself. Time feels elastic in moments like this. Each tick stretches into an eternity, every heartbeat echoing with the dread of the unknown. I remember the days when pain was something you could manage, something you could push through, but now it looms like a dark cloud, a specter that wraps its icy fingers around the soul. Modern medicine, they say, has come so far, yet here we are, grappling with the same ancient fear. What happens when the pain is too much for the body to bear? What happens when we're left vulnerable, exposed, and unable to escape? The room dims, shadows creeping in as the anesthesia begins to take hold. Sarah's eyelids flutter, her body succumbing to the grasp of impending sleep, yet her spirit fights, clawing against the darkness. I see it, the flicker of awareness, the desperate wish to cling to life, to reality, and I wonder if she can sense the battle raging within her. Jacob's breath hitches as he takes a step forward, the rawness of his grief spilling over. "Don't go," he pleads, his voice breaking like the fragile glass of their shared memories. "Please don't leave me. I can't do this without you." Every word is a desperate plea, a prayer cast into the void with no promise of return. He doesn't realize that he's become a prisoner of his own emotions, caught in a web of despair that tightens with every moment. But even in this dark abyss, hope flickers. I remember a moment, a fleeting smile shared between them, a promise of love that transcends pain. The days when they laughed together, the nights spent under starry skies, dreaming of a future unmarked by illness or fear. It was all so vivid, so alive, until life's merciless clock began to tick down. The sound of her heart monitor steadily beeping feels like a ticking time bomb, each pulse a reminder of mortality. I feel it deep in my marrow, the ache of anticipation, of fear, of longing. Will she wake up? Will she emerge from this fog of uncertainty, or will she slip away, leaving Jacob to navigate this cruel world alone? And what of the anesthetic? The promise of relief that often drapes itself in shadows, the paradox of pain management that seems to mock those who suffer. In this very moment, the irony is thick. Anesthesia, this miracle of modern medicine, yet it cannot truly erase the fear, the haunting knowledge of what lies ahead. It whispers false promises, and I can see it in Jacob's eyes. He knows the truth. He steps closer, the distance between them collapsing, and as he whispers "I love you" into the stillness, the words hang there, suspended in fragile air. I feel his pain, a raw, visceral ache that reverberates through the room, tugging at the threads of hope that cling so desperately to life. Yet, outside this room, the world continues to spin, life carries on, oblivious. The sirens wail in the distance, a reminder of the chaos beyond these walls, where others are locked in their own battles, their own struggles against pain and fear. The irony gnaws at me. How can the world be so bright, so alive, when here, in this sterile cocoon, everything feels so dark? And then, silence. A momentary pause as the monitor's beeping settles into a slow, steady rhythm, like the ebb and flow of a tide. I hold my breath, caught in the throes of uncertainty, a spectator to a scene unfolding in agonizing slow motion. Sarah's body relaxes, the tension easing, and I wonder, will she find peace in this surrender? Will she emerge from the depths, or will she become another ghost in Jacob's heart? The clock ticks on, relentless, as we navigate this labyrinth of fear and hope. In this moment, I am both Sarah and Jacob, caught between love and loss, pain and relief. The world outside continues to turn, but here, in this fragile bubble of existence, we hold our breath, suspended between moments, echoing with the weight of what it means to truly live, and the haunting fear of what it means to let go. The sterile smell of antiseptic hangs heavy in the air, nauseatingly sweet, like the sickly breath of a hospital ghost. I can hear the soft beeping of machines, a steady pulse that matches the thumping in my chest, each beat a countdown to the unknown that looms before me. I stand in the waiting room, fingers trembling, clutching the frayed edges of a dog-eared pamphlet on common surgical procedures. The words blur together, each line a siren song luring me into a dark abyss. I remember the doctor's face, stony and unreadable, as he spoke the words, surgical risks. I remember the way my sister's breath came in shallow gasps after hearing the prognosis, the cancer that had invaded her like a thief in the night, stealing her laughter and lighting her eyes like a dying star. Julia, my sister, always the fighter, now faced with a choice, whether to surrender to the monster or confront it with a blade. A palpable tension fills the room, the air thickening like fog, wrapping around me, suffocating. I can almost hear her whisper, "This is it, Mike. I'll fight." The words hang in the air like a promise, but promises can shatter like glass. In the corner, an elderly man, frail as a whisper, sits hunched over, hands clasped tightly as if holding onto his very soul. His eyes are wide, reflecting a lifetime of regrets. He glances at his daughter, pacing nervously, the crumpled tissue in her hands testament to her despair. "Dad," she says, her voice breaking. "You'll be okay." But the tremor in her voice betrays her, each syllable an echo of doubt. I want to reach out, to comfort her, but I am anchored to my own fear, a ship lost in a storm of uncertainty. Surgery. It's supposed to be a precise art, a ballet of scalpels and sutures. Yet, beneath the clinical facade lies a terrifying truth: every incision is a gamble, every stitch a fragile lifeline. I remember the doctor explaining anesthesia, its comforting embrace that masks the horror of the operating table. But what if it doesn't work? What if Julia wakes up screaming, her body betrayed by the very hands meant to save her? The thought twists in my gut like a knife, sharp and unforgiving. "I'm scared, Mike," Julia had said just days ago, her voice barely above a whisper, a vulnerable thread in a tapestry of bravado. "What if I don't wake up? What if this is goodbye?" Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, reflecting a fear I had struggled to mask. I had promised her it would be okay, but deep down, I could feel the churning dread in my own heart, the shadow of mortality that stalked us both. The clock ticks like a metronome, each second dragging and stretching, pulling us toward an inevitable confrontation with fate. Shadows dance along the walls, a macabre theater of uncertainty, where hope and despair waltz in a deadly embrace. The waiting room is a microcosm of human fragility, a gallery of fear, love, and the raw, unfiltered reality of life hanging precariously by a thread. I glance at a nearby family. Their laughter, once loud and boisterous, now hangs in the air like a ghost. The little boy, distracted by a toy, draws innocent smiles, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. Their joy feels like a distant star, twinkling in a vast, dark universe, reminding me of what we stand to lose. I close my eyes, overwhelmed by the cacophony of emotion swirling around us, a tempest of hope and dread. A nurse emerges from the operating room, her face a mask of stoicism. "Julia?" My heart races. She's here, she's alive. But as she approaches, the weight of the moment presses down on my chest like a leaden anchor. "It's time," she says softly. I remember Julia's hand gripping mine like a lifeline, her knuckles white with fear. "Promise me, Mike," she whispered, her voice tremulous. "Promise me you'll be here when I wake up." "I promise," I replied, though the words felt like smoke slipping through my fingers. The nurse leads me to a small waiting area, sterile and cold, devoid of life. I sit in silence, the clock ticking louder now, each beat a reminder of the fragility of our existence. I think about the risks, the bleeding, the infection, the chance of waking up in a body that no longer feels like home. I remember the stories I've heard, the whispered tales of botched procedures and endless pain. A shiver races down my spine. I can almost hear the echoes of those who came before us, their voices haunting the sterile halls. The minutes stretch like an eternity, and I feel the weight of despair creeping in, wrapping around me like a shroud. I remember the dreams I had, visions of Julia laughing in the sunlight, of her twirling in a field of daisies, unburdened by the darkness that threatened to engulf her. I want to hold on to those moments, to etch them into my memory, but the reality pulls me back, a stark reminder of the risks that lie ahead. As the door swings open, I rise, heart thundering like a war drum. The surgeon strides in, his expression unreadable, a mask hiding the turmoil of emotions that flicker just beneath the surface. "Julia's out of surgery," he begins, words tumbling over one another as my breath catches in my throat. "She fought well, but the weight of those two letters drapes over me like an iron curtain, suffocating. The reality of our situation descends, so heavy that I can barely breathe. My mind races, grasping for something, anything, positive, but all I can feel is the intensity of the moment, the infinite possibility of pain and heartache. And just like that, the world narrows, the noise around me fading into a distant hum, eclipsed by the enormity of the moment. I stand on the precipice of uncertainty, and as I look into the surgeon's eyes, I realize that this is not just her battle, it's ours. The risks, the realities, they bind us together in this haunting dance with fate. Each heartbeat is a reminder that love is never without fear, and sometimes, the most courageous thing we can do is simply hold on. The clock ticks on, relentless and unforgiving, as the shadows lengthen. I can feel the weight of every unsaid word, every fear echoing in my chest, waiting to be addressed. Time seems to hold its breath, and as I stand there, heart racing, I know this is only the beginning. The real confrontation is yet to come, and the shadows are thickening, whispering secrets of both doubt and hope, binding us in an uncertain fate. The stench hung thick in the air, a noxious fog that clawed at the throat and invaded the senses. Clara stumbled back, the sensation of bile rising in her chest as she pressed against the damp, crumbling wall of the alley. The moon hung low, a pale witness, casting ghostly shadows that danced with the flickering light of a distant candle. A figure slumped against the wall, a man, or what remained of one, skin grey, lips cracked, eyes vacant. His breath rattled like a death knell. She knew he was one of the many, a victim of this unseen monster lurking in the filth. "I remember the first time I saw it," Clara whispered, her heart pounding like a war drum. The first time the infection spread, a whisper that turned into a scream. Memories crashed like waves, each one a sharp shard of glass piercing her mind. It was chaos, a torrent of screams and cries that echoed in her ears, the chilling sound of panic. But there was also Ethan, the one she couldn't bear to abandon, even in this wretched pit of despair. His hands trembled as he knelt in the dirt, scrubbing feverishly at the bandages wrapped around his arm. They were stained, a deep crimson that made her stomach churn. "We can't let it take us," he muttered, lost in his own private hell. The infection was relentless, a cunning predator stalking them through the refuse of the city, food scraps, discarded dreams, and the filth of humanity itself. "Ethan, stop!" She reached for him, her fingers trembling as she brushed against his shoulder. "You'll only make it worse." The desperation in her voice sliced through the oppressive air, yet he wouldn't look up. He couldn't. The shame of his own weakness chained him to the ground, and the dirt clung to him like a lover, a reminder of the disease they were all fighting to escape. "I remember when I thought we were invincible," he replied, a ghost of a smile breaking through the anguish. "We thought we could conquer the world. But look at us now." His laugh was hollow, a brittle sound that shattered the silence. Clara's heart ached at the sight, the boy she loved slowly transformed into a shell, hollowed out by despair and the creeping dread of infection. Each day felt like a slow descent into madness. The city was a graveyard, and they were among the living dead, shuffling through the debris of unsanitary conditions. It wasn't just the physical infection that gnawed away at them, it was the despair that seeped into their bones. The fear of waking up, of stepping outside, of touching anything that might carry the virus. "Is it too late?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. The uncertainty swirled around them, thick as molasses, wrapping them in its suffocating embrace. "Is it too late for us?" She wanted to scream it into the night, to howl at the moon for answers, for salvation. "No," he said, his voice like gravel. "We fight. We fight until there's nothing left." She saw it in his eyes, an ember, a flicker of rebellion against the darkness. But how long could they endure? How long before the infections claimed them? The thought was a specter that haunted her, lurking in the shadows of her mind. As the night deepened, the silence grew menacing. The city, once a vibrant heartbeat, had fallen quiet, save for the distant wails of the suffering. Clara felt a chill creep up her spine, a premonition that something terrible was coming. She turned to Ethan, desperation clawing at her throat. "What if we don't make it? What if we're just ghosts in this place?" He looked at her, his brow furrowed, eyes glimmering with something she couldn't quite decipher. "Then we'll haunt this city," he said, a fierce defiance igniting his voice. "We'll be the specters haunting the alleyways, warning others not to make our mistakes." The intensity of his gaze sent shivers down her spine, and for a moment, she felt alive, an electric pulse connecting them against the night. But the moment shattered with a sudden cry. A woman stumbled into view, her face twisted in pain, clutching her side as blood seeped through her fingers. Clara rushed forward, instinctively reaching out, but the woman collapsed to the ground, her agonized wails puncturing the suffocating silence. "Help! Please!" The desperation clawed at Clara's insides, and Ethan was at her side, his face pale with realization. They both knew what that blood meant, an infection, the enemy they had been fighting so hard to avoid. And yet, it was too late. "Stay back!" Clara shouted, pulling Ethan away as the woman convulsed, her body racked with shaking as she gasped for breath. The sickening sound filled the air, the sound of life slipping away. Clara felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, a crushing reality that threatened to engulf them. We can't, but it was too late. A shadow surged out from the alley, a dark figure cloaked in mystery, gliding toward them like death itself. Clara's heart twisted with dread as it loomed closer, an embodiment of the very infection they tried to escape. She could see the darkness in its eyes, the promise of despair and sickness. "Run!" Ethan's voice broke through the haze, snapping her back to the moment. They turned, sprinting through the alley, their feet pounding against the cobblestones, echoing the rhythm of their racing hearts. The shadows seemed to reach for them, but they fought against the tide, the knowledge of their own mortality driving them. "Clara, we can't let it win!" Ethan shouted, his breath ragged, the urgency in his voice igniting a fire within her. "We will find a way to survive." And there it was, the flicker of hope buried deep within despair. Clara clung to it as they fled, the shadows chasing them, relentless and hungry. She didn't know if they could escape the clutches of the infection, but one thing was certain, they would fight until their last breath, against the horrors that lurked in the dark, against the unsanitary conditions threatening to consume them. In that moment, the fear morphed into something powerful, a primal instinct to survive, to live, to love even amidst the decay. And the city around them, once a spectral graveyard, transformed into a battleground where life and death danced in the haunting shadows, a testament to their struggle. Clara and Ethan ran, hearts pounding, souls entwined, knowing that within the perils of unsanitary conditions, they had one another, their only weapon against the creeping darkness. The room smelled of iron and sweat, a cocktail of fear and desperation hanging thick in the air. I stood in the shadows, the flickering candlelight dancing grotesquely on the walls, illuminating faces twisted in agony and hope. Nurses darted around like frantic specters, their eyes wide, glistening with the fear of the unknown. I could hear the rhythmic thrum of a heart monitor echoing, punctuating the tense silence. Each beep was a countdown, life or death, salvation or tragedy. In the center of it all, there was Samuel, my brother. His body lay motionless, a canvas of porcelain skin marred by the cruel strokes of fate. I remember those moments just before surgery, his eyes betraying a flicker of dread as he clutched the amulet hanging from his neck, a talisman against the unseen forces lurking in the twilight corners of our world. "What if," he had whispered, voice quivering, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken fears. "What if what?" I had replied, trying to mask the tremor in my own heart. "What if the prayers work?" He forced a smile, but I could see the shadows lurking behind his gaze. I could feel them too, tangled memories of our childhood, steeped in the myths of our ancestors. Old wives' tales that spoke of spirits, blessings, and curses. The superstition wrapped around us, a shroud of belief that clung like a second skin. I remember the stories of healing hands, of surgeons who invoked the blessings of saints, their incantations merging with the sterile sounds of scalpels and stitches. As I watched the surgeon approach with his instruments glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights, I felt the pull of something primal. I knew he was more than a man in a white coat. He had become an oracle, a vessel for divine will, cloaked in science yet steeped in the mystique of our faith. Each incision would be a prayer, each stitch a plea for mercy. The scalpel gleamed, a harbinger of fate, and the air crackled with the energy of the unholy and the holy colliding. "God, protect him," I whispered, invoking the spirits of our lineage. My heart raced as the surgeon began, his gloved hand steady, yet a tremor echoed in my chest, a vibration born from the unvoiced dread of what lay ahead. Across the room, Mary, the nurse, moved with a grace that belied the chaos. She had seen too many lives hang by a thread, too many souls either embraced by faith or swallowed whole by despair. Her faith was a shield, her superstition a sword. I remember how she would touch the rosary bead strung around her wrist, fingers gliding over the smooth surface, muttering soft prayers under her breath. They were her lifeline, her armor against the darkness that clawed at the edges of her sanity. "Samuel will be fine," she had assured me earlier, her eyes fierce with conviction. "But only if we believe. You have to believe." Her words were a blend of hope and desperation, each syllable a sacrament against the encroaching shadows. But belief is a fickle mistress, it can uplift or shatter, a fragile glass teetering on the edge of a precipice. I remember my heart racing with the wild dance of conflicting emotions, love, fear, doubt, and a glimmer of hope. The thrum of the heart monitor pulsed like a drumbeat of fate. As the surgeon's knife pierced the flesh, I felt a jolt of pain, a visceral connection. Each slice felt like a wound to my own soul. I could hear my mother's voice, her warnings, her prayers, echoing in my mind. Never tempt fate. The spirits do not forget. In that moment, I understood the paradox of our existence. The very act of surgery was an invocation, a negotiation with forces unseen. Science had its instruments, but religion wielded its own, the specters of our ancestors hovering just beyond the veil. I could see them, the ghosts of those who had come before us, their faces etched with sorrow and wisdom, whispering secrets of healing in the spaces between breaths. "Is it over?" Samuel's voice croaked, breaking the spell, a raw whisper that sliced through the tension like a shattered dream. The surgeon paused, glancing up, eyes a tempest of concentration. "Almost there," he said, but the words felt hollow, a fragile promise crumbling in the weight of reality. Mary leaned closer, her breath warm on my ear. "You must hold on to faith," she urged, clutching my arm tightly. "It's the only thing that can guide him back." And there it was, the clash of belief and doubt, a battle of wills played out in the sacred space of that operating room. I could feel the walls closing in, the shadows stretching, creeping like tendrils of smoke. I could almost taste the fear, metallic and bitter, as it mingled with the lingering scent of antiseptic. I remember the stories of old, how the ancients believed that the spirits of the departed lingered in the operating rooms, their whispers guiding the hands of the healers. But who were these spirits? Were they guardians or judges? My heart raced as the thought surged within me. What if the surgeon's hands were not only wielding instruments of healing but also dancing with the remnants of those lost? The sounds of the surgery faded into a distant echo as I spiraled deeper into the realm of uncertainty, straddling the fine line between faith and despair. "God, please," I found myself murmuring, my voice but a thread woven into the fabric of that charged atmosphere. "Let him stay." And in that moment, in the breathless silence that followed, everything hung suspended, an eternal heartbeat. The lights flickered ominously, shadows swirling like whispers of the past. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly, each second a reminder of the fragility of our existence. Time fractured. I was lost in the pull of memories, my childhood prayers, the rituals, the stories woven into the fabric of our lives. They wrapped around me like a quilt, familiar yet suffocating, tugging me down into a darkness that felt both comforting and terrifying. The surgeon's voice broke through again, a distant echo in the storm of my thoughts. "I need you to believe, all of you," he commanded, his hand steady, the scalpel glinting ominously. "We can save him, but you must be a part of this." And there it was, the challenge laid bare. My heart thundered in my chest. I could feel the weight of generations pressing down upon us, their hopes and fears mingling with our own, a cacophony of emotion swirling like a tempest. In the darkness of that room, we were all caught in a dance of life and death, faith and superstition entwined like lovers in an eternal embrace. The air grew thick with anticipation as I whispered my own silent prayer, a plea for strength, for healing, for redemption. I remember the moment stretching, bending like the time-worn tales of our ancestors. As the surgeon's hands moved with purpose, each motion a blend of science and sacred ritual, I felt our destinies intertwining, an unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of belief. And in that moment, with hearts tethered to hope and fear, we stood on the precipice of what it meant to be human, a tapestry woven with threads of faith, superstition, and the relentless pursuit of survival. The outcome was uncertain, but one thing remained clear: the echoes of our prayers would linger long after the last stitch was sewn, a testament to the power of belief in the face of a haunting unknown. The air was thick with the stench of blood and sweat, a pungent perfume of desperation and dread clinging to the dimly lit stone walls of the surgical theater. The flickering torch flames flickered like dying stars as I stood frozen, just a shadow behind the leaden curtain, peering through the fabric that separated me from the chaotic world of flesh and bone. I could hear the sharp cries of pain, guttural and raw, resonating like a haunting melody through the chamber. My heart raced. No, it thundered, a wild drum in a symphony of horror. I remember the first time I witnessed surgery, the first time I saw a man's inside spill out like a grotesque feast. It was a grotesque ballet, a dance of knives and sinew, and I was entranced, horrified, and utterly captivated. The surgeon, a man named Alaric with hands as steady as stone and eyes like a hawk, stood over his patient, mantra-like in his concentration. He wore a mask of blood, a crown of chaos, and with every incision, he pulled me deeper into a madness I yearned to understand yet feared to touch. And there was Elena, standing beside me, her face a mixture of horror and fascination. Her hands gripped the edge of the curtain, knuckles white, as if she could pull us both back from the precipice. But she was as entranced as I was, her wide eyes sparkling with a mix of curiosity and terror. "They bathed once a year," she whispered, attempting a smile, "so yeah, romance was earthy. We were two foolish children, playing at being adults in a world where life hung by the thinnest of threads." In that moment, I felt the heavy weight of the past pressing down on me, the ghosts of ancient surgeons whispering through the stones. They had seen the rise and fall of empires, the severing of limbs and lives, and now, they were watching us. The shadows danced like phantoms, reminding me of what we were training to become, healers or butchers, saviors or executioners. The line was razor-thin, and I could almost see it shimmering in the dim light. Alaric's knife glinted like a star, slicing through flesh with an ease that sent shivers down my spine. "This is the art of cutting," he'd said once, his voice a gravelly whisper, "but it's also the art of saving." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that these hands could create life as easily as they took it. But as I watched a man writhe on the table, I felt the pull of darkness. The weight of every soul that had ever laid beneath Alaric's blade pressed against my chest, threatening to suffocate me. "Remember," Alaric rasped, his voice cutting through the chaos like his knife through flesh. "It's not just about skill, it's about the heart." But what heart could withstand the screams of the damned? What heart could bear the burden of knowing the thin veil between life and death? My heart thumped violently in my chest, a caged beast longing to escape. I glanced at Elena, her face pale yet determined, and a flicker of something sparked between us. Fear. Kindred spirits lost in this dark tapestry of human suffering. "What if we fail?" I muttered, my voice almost swallowed by the cacophony of cries. She turned, her eyes fierce. "What if we don't?" And in that moment, we were more than just aspiring surgeons, we were warriors on the front line of a never-ending battle against mortality. Time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat echoing like a battle drum. I felt the pulse of ambition coursing through my veins, mixed with the icy chill of dread. What if every patient became a ghost I couldn't save? What if I became a martyr of my own ambition? As the last incision was made, Alaric leaned closer, his breath heavy with the scent of iron. "You will forget the ones you save. But you will never forget the ones you lose." The words hung in the air, a spectral promise. I could feel the truth of it echoing deep within me, reverberating against the walls of my soul. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the air, a sound more primal than anything I had ever known. It was the patient, a man with a face etched in agony, eyes wide with terror. The room spun, and I staggered back. "We're playing God," I gasped, the enormity of it crashing over me like a tidal wave. Elena grabbed my arm, her grip fierce. "We can't turn back now," she yelled, her voice laced with an urgency that lit a fire within me. "This is our calling." But what is a calling when it leads you to the depths of despair? I blinked, and everything fell silent, frozen in that moment. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. The ghosts of the past loomed larger than life, a legion of the lost and broken, whispering secrets of 1,000 failures. I could see them watching us, their hollow eyes pleading for mercy, for redemption. I remember the feeling of determination surging within me, fueled by fear, by dreams, by the irrevocable bond forged in the crucible of that dark theater. We faced the abyss together, our hearts beating as one, a raw, primal rhythm resonating through the air. Alaric stepped back, his hands coated in crimson, and offered a nod, an acknowledgement of our shared understanding. The chaos resumed, drowning my thoughts, but within the madness, I knew, deep down, I was ready to embrace the darkness. This was just the beginning. There would be more surgeries, more screams, more lives to save and lose. It was a cycle, a never-ending loop, an education that would carve its way into my very being. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all, of hope and guilt, of ambition and despair. I would rise from this darkness, a surgeon forged in the crucible of blood, bone, and the relentless pursuit of life. And as the torches flickered, casting shadows that danced like phantoms across the stone walls, I was no longer just an apprentice. I was becoming something more, something powerful, something haunted, something alive. The world outside was waiting, and I was ready to meet it head-on, come what may. The stench of blood and the acrid tang of fear hung heavy in the cramped chamber, mingling with the sickly sweet scent of burning herbs. The flickering candlelight cast grotesque shadows on the stone walls, and in that moment, I felt it, an electrifying jolt of dread that wrapped around my throat like a vice. The patient, a young man barely breathing, lay sprawled on a rickety table, his body a canvas of wounds and suffering. My heart raced as I gripped the crudely fashioned tools, rusted yet promising a false sense of salvation. "I can't do this," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rasping breaths of the dying man. Beside me, Ilara, a woman forged from resilience yet marked by her own demons, threw a glance that pierced through my feeble resolve. Her eyes burned like twin embers, fierce and unyielding, as she read the swirling chaos within me. "Do you think Galen would hesitate?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the haze of my uncertainty. "That he wouldn't plunge his hands into the unknown, desperate to save a life?" I remembered the ancient texts, the crumbling pages filled with wisdom that whispered promises of healing and understanding, yet here I was, teetering on the edge of hopelessness, shackled by my own fears. The shadows danced around us, mocking our hesitation, a cruel reminder of the lives at stake, the blood that would continue to seep into the earth if we faltered. "Galen," I murmured, the name laced with reverence and dread. The great physician of Rome, whose words echoed through the ages, whose teachings were a bridge between the ancients and us, the flawed, fumbling heirs to his legacy. I thought of his meticulous observations, the dissection of cadavers, the way he unraveled the mysteries of the human body as if it were a tapestry woven with both awe and horror. Yet, what did that knowledge mean in our hands, trembling and uncertain? I felt the weight of history pressing down on me, the relentless ticking of time reminding us that the past was forever intertwined with the present. "I remember," I began, my voice shaking, "the stories of Galen, the blood spilling on the marble floors of ancient amphitheaters. I remember the brave souls who dared to challenge fate, who believed in the power of the scalpel, the force of life and death resting on the edge of a blade. But here, under the flickering light, with every second ticking away, it feels like a cruel joke." Ilara stepped closer, her breath warm against my ear. "You're not alone in this. The ancient texts are our guiding stars, but we are the ones who must navigate the dark skies." Her words wrapped around me like a lifeline, yet still, I trembled. In that moment, I realized we were not just wielding instruments of flesh and metal, we were wielding hope, love, despair, and the raw, aching desire to make sense of suffering. The young man on the table, barely a shadow of who he once was, stirred slightly. His eyes fluttered open for an instant, filled with a haunting plea, a cry for help that echoed in the hollow chambers of my heart. I closed my eyes, inhaling the mingled sense of reality and desperation. What if I fail? I thought, the question reverberating in the depths of my soul. What if Galen's wisdom is simply a ghost that haunts these walls? But as I opened my eyes again, I caught a glimpse of Ilara, her hand steady, her expression fierce with determination. She was the embodiment of hope, a beacon piercing through the darkness, a stark contrast to my own crumbling resolve. "I remember," I whispered again, "the stories of men and women driven by passion, fueled by the fire of their convictions. I remember the whispers of the ancients, their laughter mingling with the cries of the dying. They taught us that every cut is a chance, every stitch a promise." With newfound resolve, I picked up the scalpel, its weight both foreign and familiar. I felt the pulse of history coursing through my veins, the lives that had come before me, the dreams that had flickered and died beneath the surgeon's knife. I thought of Galen, the philosopher-healer, who believed in the body's inherent ability to heal. What if he stood here now, urging us onward, prodding us to defy the inevitability of fate? "Together," I said, my voice rising above the chaos, "we can bring forth the light from this darkness." And as I made the first incision, a flash of terror surged through me. What if I was wrong? Yet, amidst the dread, a flicker of exhilaration ignited within my chest, the thrill of creation, the promise of life teetering on the edge of destruction. We worked in tandem, our hearts beating in sync, the rhythm of desperation infusing each movement with purpose. I could feel the presence of Galen whispering through the air, the ancient texts casting their shadows over our hands, guiding us as we danced the delicate line between life and death. Ilara's voice, steady and fierce, broke through the haze of my thoughts. We are the bearers of their knowledge, the vessels of their legacy. Every stitch we sew is a rebellion against despair. The words echoed through the chamber, resonating deep within my soul. I remember, I breathed, the rhythm of our actions now a symphony of hope and butchery. We are not mere practitioners, we are dreamers and believers, fighting against the relentless tide of mortality. And with each heartbeat, with each passing moment, I felt the weight of history lift slightly, the shadows retreating, surrendering to the light of our resolve. The cosmos hung in the balance, bearing witness to our desperate struggle, and as we continued our work, I realized that we were more than just keepers of ancient wisdom. We were the architects of our own fate, crafting a new narrative against the backdrop of time, against the relentless march of death. As I sewed the final stitch, a soft sigh escaped the young man's lips, an echo of life returning. I glanced at Ilara, our eyes locking in a moment of shared triumph, hearts racing with adrenaline and belief. The echoes of Galen reverberated through the stone walls, and I knew, in that fleeting instant, that we had woven something miraculous from the threads of fear and hope. And as the candle flickered low, the shadows danced wildly, I felt the pulse of history beneath my skin, a reminder that in the heart of darkness, light could still break free, weaving through the fabric of time, whispering of dreams yet unfulfilled. The room was thick with the stench of iron and fear. A single flickering candle cast long, wretched shadows on the stone walls, twisting them into grotesque shapes that seemed to mock the desperate situation unfolding within. I remember the sharp gasp of Father Gregory, his hand trembling as he gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, the candlelight reflecting a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "We must do this," he whispered, his voice barely rising above the oppressive silence. But the words hung heavy, like a death knell. Maggie lay on the table, her breath shallow, each inhalation a fragile wisp of hope mingled with despair. Her eyes, once bright with mischief, were now dulled by fever which danced like a sinister spectre across her skin. I watched her, heart thumping so painfully in my chest that I feared it might burst. "The bloodletting will bring her back," Father Gregory insisted, his conviction marred by the tremor in his voice. I wanted to scream at him, to shake the stubbornness from his bones, but I was frozen, a mere ghost haunting this wretched scene. The crude tools were laid out before us, blades glinting with the promise of pain, the promise of release. I remember the flick of Maggie's tongue over cracked lips, tasting the salt of her own tears, the salt of her own fear. "Please, don't let them," she had begged me earlier, her voice a fragile whisper that sliced through the thick air of hopelessness. I could only nod, numb and helpless, as the shadows inched closer, as the candle sputtered and plunged us further into darkness. "Father, there has to be another way," I implored, my voice trembling. But it was no use. His eyes were glazed with the zeal of a man believing he could cheat fate, believing he could wield life and death with the stroke of a blade. Outside, the world continued its mundane rhythm, the distant echo of laughter from children playing in the streets, the rich aroma of baking bread wafting from nearby homes. A world that felt miles away from this cold, stone chamber, a world that pulsed with vibrant life while we hovered on the precipice of death. I could feel the warmth of the sun through the cracks in the wall, but here, in this room, it was as if the shadows had swallowed the light whole. "Let's begin," Father Gregory said, his voice firm, though his hand shook. I felt the tremor echo in my own heart, a sickening dread. He reached for the blade, the edge glimmering like a promise unfulfilled. "Hold her still," he commanded, and I was a marionette, strings pulled taut. I pressed my hands onto Maggie's shoulders, her body frail beneath my grip, a mere flicker of the brave girl she once was. My heart broke as our eyes locked. I remembered her laughter, the way her voice danced like sunlight through leaves. I remember the way she had sung to the stars, dreaming of adventures beyond our small world. "Please," she murmured, a whisper of a plea, a ghost of her former self. It was a plea not just for her life but for the lives we all took for granted, for laughter, for joy, for love. Even the shadows trembled at the weight of those words. Father Gregory pressed the blade to her skin, and I saw the moment reality fractured. A delicate line of crimson emerged, a thread of life bleeding away, a river of hope flowing from her veins. I could not breathe, could not think, trapped in this moment where time stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. The room filled with the sound of Maggie's ragged breaths, each one a haunting echo of what was slipping away. "No, no, no!" I shouted, panic flooding my veins. In that instant, it was as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for a decision to be made. I was a flickering candle caught in a storm. I could feel the weight of history pressing down upon me, the countless generations who had stood in similar rooms, clutching their loved ones and surrendering to the ignorance of the age. "Stop!" I screamed, and the words sliced through the air, shattering the suffocating silence. Father Gregory halted, confusion knitting his brow. In that heartbeat, I saw it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the realization that we were not gods wielding life and death but mere mortals, grappling with our own failures. Maggie's eyes widened, and I could see the flicker of hope igniting like a dying star. "Please," she gasped, and it felt like the universe was collapsing in on us, a black hole of desperation where every breath was a fragile prayer. I leaned closer, my voice a raw whisper, "We'll find another way, together." Tension hung in the air like a noose, choking the light from the room. I could feel the threads of fate tightening around us, the shadows whispering secrets meant only for the grave. Every heartbeat was a reminder of mortality, every breath a reminder of love. With each passing second, hope battled despair for supremacy in the darkest corners of our souls. But in that fragile moment, something shifted. Father Gregory's shoulders sagged, the weight of centuries of misguided tradition crashing down. "What have we done?" he murmured, the question hanging heavily between us, a ghost that refused to fade. And then it happened. Maggie coughed, a violent convulsion that rattled her frail frame. Blood pooled beneath her, a dark, glistening stain spreading across the wooden table. I felt my heart shatter, the pieces cutting deep, each fragment a reminder of the life that flickered before us like a dying ember. Yet within that chaos, clarity emerged. I grasped Maggie's hand, our fingers intertwining, and whispered, "You will fight. We will fight," each word a lifeline thrown in the storm. Father Gregory stepped back, his eyes wide, a man lost in the very mess he had tried to control. And as the shadows closed in, I held on to that flicker of hope, that endless possibility of life, and I remembered that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone. The battle had only begun, a dance on the edge of oblivion, and there was something fierce in the way we clung to each other, an unyielding defiance against the night creeping in. Time slowed, the world outside continued spinning, and I realized we were standing at the precipice of something primal. The candle sputtered, and for a moment, the shadows danced, teasing the edge of reality. The echoes of our choices lingered, and as the line between life and death blurred, I felt the weight of history pressing down, and I knew this was merely the beginning of a much darker tale. The fight had ignited in us, a relentless pulse against the void, and I could only hope that our shadows would dance beneath the light once more. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow over the sterile room, and I could hear the rhythmic beeping of the machines, each pulse a reminder of the fragility of life, my life. My heart raced, a wild creature trapped in a cage of bones, echoing the chaos of my thoughts. In the corner, a shadowy figure shifted, its features obscured by a haze of uncertainty. Was it a nurse? A doctor? The embodiment of my fears? I couldn't tell anymore. I couldn't tell anything. I remember the moment they wheeled me in, the cold metal of the gurney biting into my back. The world outside the hospital was alive, people moving with purpose, while I was trapped in this sterile limbo. I could see them through the glass doors, laughter, sunlight, normalcy. I was a ghost among the living, watching the vibrant colors of life fade to a monochrome of antiseptic whites and grays. The unknown lay before me, a vast ocean swirling with dread. In the adjacent room, Sarah, my sister, paced with her phone clutched like a lifeline. I could hear her voice tremble as she spoke to our mother, her words slicing through the air, sharp and frayed. "No, Mom, I don't know what's happening. They just said, complications." each syllable dripped with fear. Sarah, who had always been my protector, now wore the mask of uncertainty, and it was terrifying to see. I wanted to reach out, to tell her I was okay, but the words lodged in my throat, heavy like stones. The haunting whispers of uncertainty wrapped around us, tightening like a noose. What if they don't know? I thought. What if this is it? My mind spiraled into the abyss of possibility, each thought darker than the last. I could almost hear the clock ticking, its sound reverberating through the walls, counting down the minutes, each tick a reminder of the fragility of existence. The doctor entered, tall, somber, a harbinger in a white coat. We need to discuss the test results. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous. My heart raced, a frantic drumbeat echoing in the silence. I could see Sarah stiffen, a deer caught in the headlights of impending doom. The doctor's gaze fell on me, the weight of his eyes threatening to crush me. There are options, he began, but the words felt hollow, a lifeline tossed into a churning sea. I remember the fear that gripped me, clawing at my insides, a feral beast unleashed. The unknown loomed like a shadow, whispering sinister possibilities. What if I was more than just a patient? What if I was a statistic, a mere number in a cold ledger? My breaths quickened, each inhale a battle against the rising tide of panic. Are you okay? Sarah's voice broke through the haze, laced with concern. I wanted to tell her I was fine, that I was just tired, but the words evaporated like mist. Instead, I nodded, and the action felt like a betrayal. I wasn't fine. I was drowning in fear. The doctor continued, his words blurring into a cacophony of medical jargon. I grasped at fragments of meaning, but the details swam away, elusive. We'll schedule a procedure, he said, but what did that mean? I could only imagine the sterile instruments glinting under harsh lights, the cold steel that would invade my body, my sanctum. Pain danced at the edges of my consciousness, a spectre waiting to be summoned. Time blurred, an unrelenting river sweeping us along with no shore in sight. I could see Sarah's face becoming paler, her veins filled with the same dread I felt. I wanted to comfort her, but how could I comfort someone when I was on the edge of an abyss? The walls closed in, suffocating. Each breath I took felt like a betrayal of my own body, the very vessel that had brought me to this moment of soul-crushing uncertainty. The fluorescent lights hummed, a relentless reminder that I was here, trapped in this limbo where fear and pain intertwined. I could hear whispers from the corridor, other patients, other stories, all shrouded in the same bleakness. Shadows moved like ghosts, each one carrying the weight of their own suffering. I was not alone, but it felt like an unending solitude. Sarah's hand brushed against mine, warm and real, grounding me in the storm. "We'll get through this," she whispered, but her voice trembled, a melody tinged with discord. I could see the cracks forming in her facade, the fear lurking behind her brave smile. We were both lost children, desperately clinging to the last threads of hope, but what did hope mean in a place like this? I remember the sound of footsteps, urgent, frantic. A nurse burst into the room, her face a mask of professionalism, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of sympathy. "We need to prepare you," she said, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of urgency. My heart sank. This was it. The precipice of the unknown. In that moment, the world shrank to just the three of us, me, Sarah, and the nurse. Time stretched and twisted, warping into something unrecognizable. I could feel the weight of the universe bearing down on us, each second a lifetime. The shadows flickered, twisting into grotesque shapes, reminding me of my deepest fears. What would happen when the lights went out? Would I fade into oblivion? Would I become just another nameless ghost haunting these sterile halls? The nurse prepared thee for, her hands deft but her movements tinged with something darker, a hidden knowledge of what lay ahead. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was anchored to this spot, this moment. Pain, fear, the weight of the unknown, each one clung to me like a shroud. "Close your eyes," she said softly, but all I could see was darkness, an abyss, an endless night where hope flickered like a dying flame. I squeezed Sarah's hand tighter, and in that moment, I felt the pulse of fear that connected us, a shared heartbeat in a world where panic reigned. "Stay with me," I whispered, and she nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Together, we stood at the edge, staring into the void. The room was a sterile white, too bright, too unforgiving, the air thick with antiseptic and unspoken dread. I could hear the ticking of the clock, each second stretching like a breath held too long. It was the kind of silence that screams. I remember the moment when the nurse's eyes widened, reflecting a flicker of something, fear. The subtle shift in the atmosphere was palpable. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Sarah lay on the table, her body swathed in sheets, a ghost of the vibrant woman who had greeted me with laughter just days before. That laughter echoed in my mind now, juxtaposed against the stark reality of the situation. "It's going to be okay," I had told her, squeezing her hand as she was wheeled in, my voice firm but cracking at the edges. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But here we were, on the precipice of the unknown, and I could feel the ground slipping beneath my feet. Dr. Hargrove stood at the head of the table, a Titan clad in scrubs, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a man of skill, perhaps too much so, a god in a world where he wielded a scalpel like a painter's brush. But gods can fall, and in that moment, I could sense the tremor in his hands, the flash of doubt in his eyes. He had whispered to me earlier, "We'll make her better," but what if he was wrong? What if he was just a man? The room filled with the rhythmic beeping of machines, a haunting symphony that played like a dirge. I could feel the anxiety crawling up my throat, clawing for escape. I remember gripping the edge of the chair, my knuckles white, as the anesthesiologist adjusted the mask over Sarah's face. That tiny action, so mundane yet awe-inspiring, felt like sealing a fate. It was a moment suspended in time, a breath before the plunge. As the seconds dragged on, I couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. The clock ticked louder, mocking my thoughts. I shifted in my seat, glancing at the sterile instruments, scalpels, clamps, scissors, silent witnesses to countless miracles and atrocities alike. What stories had they etched into the flesh of their victims? I remember thinking of the scars left behind, not just on the body but on the soul. And then it happened, a sudden commotion, a sharp intake of breath from the nurse. I turned, heart racing, as Dr. Hargrove's voice broke through the haze, strained and urgent. "Pressure's dropping." My stomach churned. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Panic surged through me. I remember staring into Sarah's face, her once bright eyes now closed, her chest rising and falling in a shallow rhythm. "Hold steady!" Dr. Hargrove barked, and the room erupted into chaos. I could barely process the movements around me, the frantic energy as the team fought against an unseen enemy. I was a spectator in a twisted play, every heartbeat echoing the terror that coursed through me. I remember the feeling of helplessness blooming in my chest, a dark flower unfurling its petals. I caught a glimpse of Sarah's hand, lifeless against the stark white sheets. It felt like a betrayal of everything we had hoped for. Memories flooded my mind, her laughter, her dreams, the plans we made for a future that now seemed to vanish like smoke. I remember her telling me about her aspirations, her desire to travel, to see the world. Someday, she had said, her eyes sparkling. But what good were dreams now, when they were slipping through our fingers like grains of sand? As I watched Dr. Hargrove, I saw the weight of his own struggle, a battle against the clock, against fate. I knew he was a good man, but even good men falter. In that moment, he was just a man, grappling with the enormity of his actions. What went wrong? I thought, the question a knife digging deeper into my gut. Was it a mistake? A miscalculation? The uncertainty was suffocating. Just then, the room quaked with the sound of alarms, a cacophony of despair that pierced through the chaos. "Get the crash cart," someone shouted, and I felt the world around me shatter. It was as if time slowed, every movement stretching into infinity as they fought to save her, their voices mingling into a distorted symphony of urgency and despair. I remember gripping the edge of my chair harder, as if it could anchor me in this storm. My heart raced wildly, like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Would they bring her back? Would I ever hear her laughter again? I could feel tears pooling in my eyes, blurring my vision as I willed myself to stay strong, to believe that she would emerge from this alive. And then, silence again. An eerie, suffocating silence that pressed down on my chest. The beeping of the machine slowed, faltering, like a candle flickering in the wind. I watched as Dr. Hargrove's shoulders sagged, a mountain crumbling under the weight of its own grief. The moment hung heavy, thick with an unnameable dread. Suddenly, a voice broke through the fog, sharp, clear. "We need to contact her family." It was like a hammer striking glass, shattering the fragile piece of my heart. Family. I remembered Sarah's mother, her brother who adored her, the pain that would ripple through them like a wave. I could almost hear their cries, feel their heartbreak. The realization gripped me tighter than the fear. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about a web of lives unraveling. I looked at Dr. Hargrove, his face a mask of sorrow, and something shifted in me. I remember feeling a surge of anger mixed with despair, a tempest brewing inside. How could you let this happen? I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, all I could do was sit, paralyzed by the enormity of it all, a bystander in a tragedy unfolding before my eyes. And in those moments, I realized that this wasn't just a surgical failure. It was a human failure, a collision of hopes and dreams, a testament to fragility. I remember every heartbeat echoing in my ears, the raw intensity of the moment, a reminder that life is a delicate dance on the edge of a knife. The clock ticked away, the air heavy with anticipation, as I steeled myself for the inevitable. We were caught in a storm, and I could only hope that somehow, against all odds, we would find our way back to the light. But as I looked around the room, I could almost see the shadows of their mistakes creeping in, haunting us all. The stench of decay hung thick in the air, a suffocating blanket that wrapped around the city like a lover's embrace, unwanted, yet familiar. I stood in the dimly lit operating room, a chamber of horrors dressed in flickering candlelight, surrounded by faces etched with desperation. Flesh and bone lay exposed on the table before me, a canvas of agony awaiting a surgeon's touch. The world outside was a graveyard, the streets haunted by mourners and the gasping breath of the sick. Shadows danced on the walls, each flicker a reminder of mortality, a countdown to the inevitable. I remember the cries, the piercing wails of mothers, the frantic whispers of lovers, and the guttural sobs of the dying. They haunted the corridors like ghosts, searching for solace in a time when hope was as fragile as the skin that separated life from death. There was a darkness that seeped into everything, yet I was drawn to the blood, the urgency, the life force slipping away with each heartbeat, each tick of the clock. It was a chaotic symphony of despair, and I was its conductor. Amidst this chaos stood my friend, Thomas, a surgeon with hands as steady as a mountain but a heart that trembled at the thought of failure. His eyes, once bright with ambition, now mirrored the shadows that crept around us. He had watched too many succumb to the plague, too many with dreams unfulfilled, hopes dashed like fragile glass. "Every cut is a gamble," he whispered to me one night, his voice barely above a breath, "and I don't know how much longer I can bear the weight of the dice." Then there was Clara, a nurse whose laughter had once filled these walls but now echoed with a hollow timbre. She came to us with a heart full of compassion, ready to save the world one stitch at a time. But the plagues had clawed at her spirit, pulling her deeper into a web of despair. I watched her as she bandaged the wounds of the infected, her hands trembling. "If I can just save one," she murmured, though her eyes betrayed her, they held the weight of countless failures. "If I can just save one, it will all be worth it." And there I was, the quiet observer, overwhelmed by the horror of it all. I remember the night Clara nearly broke. We had just completed a surgery, the man on the table had succumbed to infection, the wound festering like a festoon of nightmares. As I cleaned my instruments, I could hear her muffled sobs from the corner. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice cracking like dried parchment. "What good is saving lives if every day we lose more?" I longed to comfort her, to say the right words, but all I could do was stand, frozen in the moment, like a statue sculpted from grief. Each day was a new battle against time, against the encroaching shadows. The people outside were not merely bodies, each one was a story, a universe unto themselves. I remember a child, oh, how the memory clings to my thoughts like ivy to stone. Her name was Eliza, and she was no more than 7. I had seen her once, dancing in the sun, her laughter bubbling like a fresh spring. When she came to us, her body was nothing more than a vessel of bacteria and fear, her spirit dimming with every passing moment. "Please," she whispered, "make me better." I swear, I felt the world shatter around us, her frail hand gripping mine like a vice. I remember the weight of her gaze, the innocence in her eyes, the way the universe seemed to hold its breath. I couldn't save her. How could I? To cut into living flesh while knowing the odds stacked against us felt like blasphemy. Every incision felt wrong, like tearing apart the fabric of fate itself. I remember once, a man came in with a gaping wound on his leg, infested with maggots, nature's cruel joke on humanity. Thomas looked at me, and I saw the ghosts in his eyes, the faces of those he had tried to save, the blood that stained his hands. "We must try," he said, but I could see the flicker of doubt in him, a brief moment of hesitation that gnawed at his resolve. The atmosphere crackled with tension, the air heavy with the unspoken fear that clung to our skin. Each new case felt like a death sentence, a reminder that we were mere mortals amidst a relentless tide of suffering. And yet, the light of our humanity flickered in those moments, Clara's quick laughter punctuating the dark, Thomas's fierce determination igniting a fire in me that I didn't know existed. Together, we became a family forged in the crucible of despair, our bonds tightening with each life we lost and each life we fought for. But the city was alive with death, it roared with the laughter of the reaper, mocking our futile attempts to save it. Each corner we turned felt like we were plunging deeper into the abyss, where hope was an echo fading into the void. I remember the clock ticking, the sound relentless, each tick a reminder of the lives slipping through our fingers like sand. The night was always the worst. When the streets fell silent and the moon hung low, illuminating the faces of the afflicted, it felt as if the cosmos conspired against us. I would sit awake, haunted by the cries of those we could not save, the memories seeping into my bones like ice. In those moments, I felt time stretch, feel its grip, suffocating and vast, as I lay awake, yearning for a dawn that felt so far away. We were trapped in an endless loop, cutting, stitching, healing, and losing. With each passing day, I could feel the weight of our failures pressing down, like a shroud over our dreams. And as we stood at the precipice of despair, I realized that the only thing that could save us was each other. But how could we lean on one another when we were all so broken? The tension mounted, it was visceral, palpable. The air shimmered with unspoken words, a hurricane brewing beneath the surface. I looked at Thomas, his brow furrowed, the lines deepening with every case. And Clara, standing by the door, the flickering light casting shadows across her weary face. The clock ticked on, relentless. Each second felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that we were still alive, still fighting. As the city breathed its last, we stood together, three flawed souls in a world of chaos. We had our scars, the ones we wore on our skin and the ones etched deep within our hearts. We were but a flicker against the vast night, yet somehow we found strength in the darkness. And in that flicker, in that desperate hope, we chose to fight. The lights flickered in the surgical theater, shadows dancing grimly on the sterile walls. A heart monitor beeped steadily, each pulse ringing like a death knell in the suffocating silence. I stood at the edge, my fingers trembling against the cool metal of the counter, my breath hitching in my throat. This was not just surgery, this was the battleground of ambition and prejudice, where dreams met the jagged edge of reality. "I can't do this," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse, cracking under the weight of her fear. She stood beside me, a bundle of nerves in scrubs that hung loosely on her frame. Her eyes, bright with fierce determination one moment, clouded with doubt the next. What if they see me as just another girl in a man's world? What if I fail? I could feel the heat radiating off her, a mixture of fear and fury, a storm brewing beneath her surface. She clenched her jaw, and I thought about how many times we'd been told that we didn't belong here. How many times had we heard the whispers echoing through the halls, air thick with condescension? "You really think you can do this? You're not cut out for this job." The words haunted us like specters, hovering in the corners of our minds, ready to strike. "Emma, listen," I said, my voice steadying as I forced a smile. "You've worked harder than anyone. They don't see you as a girl who wants to be a surgeon, they see a surgeon. You're going to save lives today. But even as I spoke, a part of me trembled with doubt, a disquieting shadow that gnawed at the edges of my bravado. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of vulnerability, the fear that this was all just a facade, a cruel joke played on us by fate. Across the room, Dr. Lawrence stood, a titan cloaked in authority. His sharp gaze cut through the tension, and I felt my heart racing, each beat echoing like a war drum. I remembered my first day in the OR, the way he dismissed my questions with a wave of his hand, how he'd said, "Surgery is no place for sentiment." The memory clawed at me, a fresh wound in my heart. But then there was Lila, who had found her strength in feigned indifference. She was brash, bold, unapologetic. "They want to see us fail," she often declared, her laughter like shards of glass, cutting through the dark. "But we'll show them." Lila's reckless abandon was intoxicating. It ignited a fire in me, but it also terrified me. What if we lost ourselves in this fight? What if the sheer weight of the world crushed us both? Suddenly, a loud crash broke through the stillness. The sound echoed in my ears, a jarring reminder that we were all just one mistake away from disaster. Dr. Lawrence had dropped a scalpel. The tension tightened, coiling around us, and I watched as he bent down to retrieve it, the ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. In that moment, I felt a rush of anger. Could he even comprehend the weight of the lives we had been entrusted with? Did he know the sacrifices we'd made, the nights spent studying, the tears shed over textbooks? "Focus, ladies!" Dr. Lawrence barked, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. "This isn't a fashion show." I bristled at his words, a fire roaring in my chest. This was our moment, and we had every right to take up space in the OR, yet here we were, reduced to mere spectators by his condescension. "Emma, you're the one holding the scalpel," I reminded her, my heart racing as the clock ticked down. I could see the fear flickering in her eyes, and it sparked something deep within me. "You're not just a girl. You're a surgeon. Remind him of that." As we prepped for the procedure, the atmosphere thickened, each inhalation heavy with unspoken words. I sensed the weight of history pressing down on us, a legacy of gender bias that had shaped the very fabric of this profession. We were fighting a war, not just against an illness but against a system that had long deemed us unworthy. I looked over at Emma, her hand steadying now, her breath evening out. I remembered how she'd told me about her father, a surgeon himself, who had never believed in her dreams. "He told me I'd be better off as a nurse," she'd said, tears glistening in her eyes. The pain of that rejection was palpable, a wound that refused to heal. But there was Lila, her laughter ringing through the air, daring the darkness to swallow her whole. "They're scared of us," she'd said one night, her voice a fierce whisper. "Because they know we're capable of so much more." Her words lingered in the air, a mantra of defiance. The moment the patient was wheeled in, the world narrowed down to that single heartbeat, a fragile thread connecting us all. Emma was ready, I felt it in the air, thick with electricity. This was not just a surgical procedure. This was a battle cry, a declaration that we were here, we were present, and we would not be silenced. In the moments that followed, as scalpel met skin, I felt the tension dissolve into focus, a singularity of purpose enveloping us. I caught Emma's eye, and in that instant, there was an unspoken promise: we would rise, we would fight, and we would become the surgeons we were meant to be. But even as the operation progressed, I could feel the specter of doubt lingering like an unwanted ghost. Would this be enough? Would the world embrace us as equals? As we fought against the tide of history, I knew the struggle was far from over. The heart monitor beeped steadily, each pulse echoing the rhythm of our resolve. The light flickered again, shadows wrapping around us like a lover's embrace, and I realized, in this moment of chaos and creation, that we were more than just our titles. We were warriors, the embodiment of dreams so fierce they could not be extinguished. The walls of the OR loomed around us, a fortress where battles raged and realities collided, but I felt the weight of the world shift, just for a moment, and I knew it was only the beginning. The clock ticks in the sterile room, its sound a relentless metronome marking the seconds of a life hanging by a thread. I can hear the whispers of the nurses, their voices a soft murmur layered with tension, like a prayer spoken too quietly to reach the heavens. I'm staring at the operating table, where a man, barely 30, lies unconscious, his life etched into the lines of his face, lines that tell stories of laughter, regret, heartache. I can feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on my shoulders, heavier than the lead apron I wear. In this moment, I am not just a surgeon, I am both the savior and the monster. Dr. Elena Roberts, my hands trembling as they hover above the man, her heart beats in sync with the rhythm of the heart monitor. She glances at the bright screens, the numbers flickering like stars in a haunted night sky. What if I fail, she whispers to herself, a breath caught in her throat. She remembers the last patient, young, vibrant, a promise of a future, cut short by her own mistake, a slip of the scalpel. The world outside the operating room blurs into insignificance. Here, in this domain, perception warps into a distorted reflection of reality. Surgeons are gods, they say. Yet, they forget, even gods bleed. In the hallway, shadows stretch long under the fluorescent lights. Mark, the surgical intern, leans against the wall, his face a mix of admiration and despair. "You're a miracle worker, Dr. Roberts," he says, his voice low, barely a whisper. But Mark knows the truth, doesn't he? He knows the whispers that trail behind them, the way people view surgeons like they're untouchable, perfect beings. They forget the sleepless nights, the emotional toll, the stigma that clings to the very fabric of their existence. "You don't understand," he continues, his eyes searching hers for some glimmer of reassurance, a sign that she isn't just another broken soul hidden behind a white coat. "I remember the first time I picked up a scalpel," she replies, her voice trembling with a mixture of nostalgia and horror. "It felt like wielding a sword against the darkness. I was invincible. But that first cut, it was supposed to save a life. I thought I could heal. Instead, I opened a wound that clawed at my heart." Can you feel the shadows, Mark? They're everywhere, lurking, waiting for the moment I stumble again. The words spill from her like blood from a fresh wound, raw and unguarded. Mark's face pales, the weight of her confession settling into the silence between them, each beat of his heart echoing in the emptiness. "But you're not alone," he urges, desperately trying to bridge the chasm of doubt encircling her. "We are here. You're here. You can't let this define you. You're a surgeon, Elena. You save lives." The conviction in his voice clashes with the haunting memories that grip her soul. "But what if I don't?" she murmurs, the fear coiling tighter around her heart, squeezing until breath feels impossible. Outside, the city pulses with life, a cacophony of laughter, sirens, and the hum of existence. Yet here, within these walls, a different world breathes, a parallel universe where triumph and tragedy dance in an eternal waltz. The social stigma surrounding surgeons looms large, clouding their brilliance with shadows of doubt. They wear their titles like crowns, yet beneath the polished surface lies a labyrinth of struggles, secrets, and the ghosts of decisions made in the heat of life and death moments. "You know what they say," Mark says softly, breaking the silence. "Surgeons are just as human as the rest of us. But society, the masses, they turn us into something else. They expect miracles, but they forget we're not gods. We're just people, scared, like everyone else." His words hang in the air, a bitter truth that lingers long after he speaks. In the operating room, the heart monitor beeps steadily, a reminder that life persists even in the face of despair. Elena grips the scalpel tighter, each heartbeat a countdown, a reminder of the stakes at play. She breathes in, fighting against the rising tide of anxiety threatening to consume her. Shadows flicker at the edge of her vision, memories of past failures clawing at her resolve. "I'm so tired of the stigma," she confesses, her voice barely more than a breath. "People don't see the sacrifices we make, they only see the title. They think we're invulnerable." If only they knew the truth. The jagged edge of her voice slices through the sterile air, raw and vulnerable. She feels it, a mix of rage and sadness, a tempest brewing inside her. "Maybe," Mark replies, a flicker of something bright in his eyes, "we can change that. We can show them. We can be the voice for those who were lost, those who failed. We can make them see that it's okay to be afraid, that it's okay to fall." A single tear slips down Elena's cheek, a testament to the weight she carries. She wipes it away, but the emotion remains, a reminder of her humanity. What if I can't, Mark? What if I'm destined to be another ghost in the system, another statistic? You're not, he insists, stepping closer. You're a healer. You're more than a label. We define ourselves, not society. Remember that. The words ignite a fire within her, a flicker of hope that feels both beautiful and terrifying. The darkness that surrounds her begins to recede, just a little, like the dawn breaking against the grip of night. I remember, she breathes, the joy of saving a life, the laughter of family who left the hospital with hope. I remember, and in that moment, their eyes lock, and the tension shifts, crackling in the air like charged electricity. The moment hangs, a fragile balance of courage and fear, a shared heartbeat echoing in the silence. The world outside continues to thrum, a reminder of everything that waits beyond these walls. And as she takes a deep breath, Elena knows she cannot escape the stigma, but she can change its narrative. She can be the voice that shatters the silence, a surgeon, yes, but also a human being, flawed yet fierce. In this room of stark reality, where the fate of one lies in the hands of another, the shadows linger, but so does the light. And as she steps forward, the weight of expectation transforming into resolve, the lines between savior and monster blur. The fight is not over, it has only just begun. And in the heart of it all, the truth resounds, we are all a little broken, yet still whole, caught in the web of our shared humanity. The operating room was a sterile battlefield. The overhead lights blazed like the sun, casting stark shadows that twisted around the faces of the surgical team. I stood there, heart thrumming in my chest, watching Dr. Mason's hands move with a precision honed from years of practice, a god of flesh and bone, wielding scalpels as if they were extensions of his own being. But gods, too, can falter. The moment was electric, frozen in time yet slipping into darkness. I remember the patient's shallow breaths, a soft, desperate rhythm lost in the whir of machines, a clock ticking down to the unknown, a heartbeat that could be snuffed out in an instant. I remember the way the nurses moved, almost like dancers in a macabre ballet, their faces set in masks of calm, but I could see the flicker of fear in their eyes. It was a fear I knew all too well, the fear of failure, of accountability, of lives hanging by threads we couldn't always see. And then, the incident. A slip, just a fraction of a second where everything spiraled. A misplaced tool, a gasp that shattered the silence. There. I saw it. The moment that would haunt us all. Dr. Mason's brow furrowed, the tension coiling around him like a serpent, squeezing tighter. His hands trembled, just once, but in surgery, once can feel like a lifetime. The patient's body jerked, and a collective breath caught in our throats. I remember. The room felt like the inside of a tomb, suffocating and hollow. I caught a glimpse of the patient's wide, terrified eyes, reflecting the stark fluorescent lights. I felt my stomach drop. The weight of inevitability pressed upon me. How quickly the tables turned. One moment, a life was in our hands, the next, chaos. Mason's voice shattered the stillness, we need to stabilize, now. The urgency cut through the panic like a blade, but the tension swelled, a relentless tide threatening to drown us. The nurse, Sarah, her hands shaking as she worked, rushed to apply pressure. I could see the beads of sweat forming on her brow. It felt surreal, like a nightmare where the exit was just out of reach. And there it was, the ghost of accountability, looming in the corner, a shadow that whispered of consequences. Would we be held liable? In that moment, it wasn't just about saving a life, it was about what failure meant within these sterile walls. I could almost hear the ticking of the clock echoing through the hallways of the hospital, each tick a reminder of the weight of our choices. I remember how Mason's expression shifted, the confidence that once radiated from him now draped in dread. What if it's my fault? He murmured, almost to himself, the words tumbling out like broken glass. The weight of responsibility crushed him. I saw it in his eyes, the fear of judgment, the unrelenting question of liability that haunted every surgeon. Would the law see him as a healer or a harbinger? The patient's breathing grew weaker, and I felt the room hold its breath. Would we bear the burden of this? I didn't know whether to scream or cry. I felt raw, exposed, and utterly helpless. We need to stay focused," I shouted, almost desperate, as if my words could tether us to the present, to hope. But hope was a cruel mistress. Outside the chaos, a world awaited: lawyers, malpractice lawsuits, and courtroom battles. I imagined the headlines: surgeon fails, patient dies. The thought was like ice in my veins. Would we be left to piece together our lives in the aftermath? Mason's hands, once steady, faltered again, a tremor that echoed my own internal turmoil. I remembered the stories, the whispers of surgeons who had faced the gavel of justice, who had lost everything: their careers, their dignity. In that room, we were fighting not just for a life, but against the abyss of accountability. Would the law hold us in a chokehold, suffocating our intentions? The room pulsed with fear, a tangible entity, thick and suffocating, and I could see the toll it was taking on us all. I felt Sarah's hand brush mine, a fleeting connection that transmitted shared anxiety. A small gesture, but in that moment, it was everything, a reminder that we weren't alone in this madness. "Push!" Mason cried, his voice cracking, a plea for strength. I could feel the air grow electric, tension snapping like a thin wire. The patient's body fought against the inevitable. It was a visceral thing, life clinging desperately, and yet, the lines of responsibility blurred as the seconds stretched out like an eternity. The clock ticked, and I could taste the bitterness of fear on my tongue. I remembered the weight of the world outside these walls, the families waiting, the lives intertwined with this fragile moment. I felt the pull of the cosmos, the insignificance of our fears against the vast, unfeeling universe. And yet, every decision we made here was monumental, rippling through the fabric of existence. "Hold the line!" Mason shouted, and it struck me then, the battle we were fighting was not just for the patient, but against the specter of doubt that threatened to consume us. It was a fight for our futures, our souls laid bare, unprotected against scrutiny. And just like that, reality crashed down again. A sound, a flat line. The machines that once sang a symphony of life now screeched in a haunting silence. I felt it, the breath of despair, the chilling touch of accountability wrapping around my heart. In that heartbeat, we were not just surgeons, we were witnesses to our own failure, trapped in an unending loop of what ifs and maybes. In that sterile arena, the ghosts of lives lost and saved loomed over us, and as the reality of our actions settled in, we stood suspended in time. The battle raged on, but the war had only just begun. I could feel the weight of the world pressing down, the gavel of justice waiting just beyond the door. Would we stand trial not only in the court of law, but in the eyes of our own souls? The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, the kind that seeps into the very bones of the earth, a reminder that life is fleeting, fragile. In the candlelit chaos of the operating theater, a man lay on the table, his chest a canvas of agony, a cacophony of gasps echoing off the stone walls. I stood close, my heart pounding against my ribs, each beat a desperate plea for salvation. The surgeon, a figure cloaked in shadow and desperation, poised his blade as if it were an artist's brush, ready to carve not just flesh but the very fabric of mortality itself. "Hold him down," a voice barked, and the command sliced through the tension like a knife. I could feel the heat of the moment, the sweat dripped from my brow, mingling with the stench of fear. There was no room for hesitation, only the grim dance of life and death. The patient's eyes rolled back, a haunting reflection of the soul's surrender. I fought the urge to look away, to shield myself from the raw truth of our existence. I remember the first time I saw a surgery, the first cut, the first scream. It was a different world then, where science clashed with superstition, where bloodletting was considered a cure and the hum of the cosmos was drowned out by the screams of the damned. And here I stood, caught in the merciless grip of the Renaissance era, where the boundary between pain and healing blurred into a grotesque tapestry of human endeavor. There was Lucien, the surgeon, a man whose hands were both tender and brutal, a dichotomy that mirrored the world around him. He had spent years studying the human body, dissecting the very essence of life, yet he often questioned whether he understood it at all. "What am I?" he would whisper to the stillness of the night, as if the shadows held the answers. A savior or a butcher? The weight of his choices pressed down on him like a leaden cloak. And then there was Elara, the nurse, a fierce spirit, bound by duty yet longing for freedom. She had seen too much, the bodies stacked like discarded dolls, the desperate pleas of families, the ghosts of those who had not made it. If I could just run, she would murmur in her darkest moments, her fingers trembling with resentment, if I could just escape this never-ending cycle of suffering. But her heart, so tender and fierce, kept her anchored, tethered to this grim reality. "Keep the wound open," Lucien shouted, his voice a sharp knife against the backdrop of muffled cries. I could see his determination, the way it radiated from him like a fever. He was a man on the edge, each incision a battle against the clock, each stitch a prayer for redemption. I could feel Ilara's breath beside me, shallow and quick, as if we were both locked in a macabre waltz with fate. The flickering candlelight danced with shadows, flickering like the fleeting hopes of those who dared to dream of healing. Time stretched, pulled taut like a bowstring ready to snap. I could hear the clock ticking, each tick a reminder of our mortality, a reminder of Lucien's struggle against the inevitable decay of the flesh. "Courage," he whispered to himself, the word barely audible over the chaos. It filled the room, a desperate echo of defiance. And yet, I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, a vulnerable flicker that threatened to extinguish under the weight of reality. Suddenly, a gasp shattered the tension like glass shattering against stone. The patient convulsed, his body a wild tempest of agony. I felt Ilara's hand clutch my arm, nails digging into my skin, the pain grounding me to this moment. "We're losing him," she cried, her voice a broken melody, laced with urgency and fear. Lucien's eyes widened, the moment crystallizing in the air, a haunting blend of terror and resolve. "More light," he shouted, his voice thunderous against the stone walls. The candles flickered, casting long, eerie shadows that danced like phantoms, teasing the edges of our sanity. I could feel the tension coil around us like a serpent, waiting to strike. Ilara's breath quickened, a frantic rhythm that mirrored my own. We were locked in this moment, bound by the fear of failure, the taste of despair thick on our tongues. "Please, come back to us," she whispered into the chaos, her voice cracking, a sound so raw it felt like an open wound. It was a plea to the universe, a desperate wish for a miracle in a place where miracles were buried beneath layers of flesh and bone. I could see her heart breaking, each beat reverberating with the weight of lives we could not save, dreams we could not heal. In that suspended moment, time unraveled. I remembered the stories of old, of the barber surgeons with their rusty tools, of the nights spent under the ghostly glow of the moon, where every life hung by a thread. The past echoed in my mind, the failures, the triumphs, the relentless march of progress against the backdrop of human suffering. And then, as if caught in a dream, the world shifted. Lucien's hands moved with a grace that belied the chaos around him, each incision a testament to his resolve. He was no longer just a man, he was a vessel of hope, an embodiment of the struggle against the inevitable. "I will not let you die," he shouted, a declaration that shook the very foundation of our existence. But with each breath, I felt the weight of doubt creeping in, an insidious whisper that threatened to drown us all. What if we failed? What if Lucien was wrong? The tension hung heavy, a tangible force that wrapped around us, each heartbeat echoing the fragility of life. Ilara's fingers tightened around my wrist, her fear palpable, a shared bond in this horror. "We must keep believing," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the darkness. And just like that, something shifted, a flicker of hope ignited within the depths of despair. It was a fragile flame, teetering on the brink of extinction, yet it held the promise of a new dawn. In the depths of that night, as the boundaries of life and death blurred, we stood as witnesses to the dawn of a new era. A mere heartbeat away from despair, we had dared to hope. But hope, like life, is a fickle mistress, always just out of reach, taunting us with its possibilities. As Lucien made the final cut, the room held its breath. In that moment, the past collided with the future, and the shadows whispered promises of change. A new era of surgery was unfolding, a rhythm of life and death that would echo through the ages, a haunting reminder of our humanity. The question lingered in the air, in this dance with the cosmos, would we find redemption or succumb to the darkness? The answer hung, suspended in time, waiting to be unveiled. The knife glinted under the dim light of the flickering torch, a cold, metallic promise in the air, heavy with the scent of sweat and fear. I stood on the precipice of chaos within that makeshift chamber, bare, save for the battered table, an altar to desperation and hope. My heart thudded, a relentless drum echoing through the silence, punctuated only by the soft, unsteady breaths of the patient lying beneath the thin, stained cloth. They were strangers, yet their pain coursed through me like an electric current, binding our fates in that moment. Across the room, a woman, Elena, they called her, clutched her hands together so tightly that her knuckles turned white, each fingertip a ghostly shade of lavender. Her eyes, pools of anguish, flickered between hope and horror. She looked at her son, Thomas, barely 15, his body sprawled out in a way that made my gut twist. Just a simple infection, they said, just a small slice of flesh gone wrong. But who was I to wield the blade when the very act of slicing opened a chasm of cultural beliefs, fears, and long-held superstitions about the sanctity of the body? I remember when the villagers believed the body was a sacred vessel, a gift from the cosmos. In their minds, surgery was a blasphemy. I remember the whispers, how they spoke of spirits that roamed the night, seeking vengeance on those who dared defy nature. You mustn't cut the body, or the spirit will wander forever, they warned with eyes wide and filled with dread. But here I was, the butcher, the savior, caught between my own convictions and theirs. Will it hurt? Thomas murmured, a flicker of fear piercing the haze. His voice, barely a whisper, echoed off the walls like a prayer. The room held its breath, the silence thickening as if the air itself was bracing for impact. It will, I said, unable to mask the quaver in my voice. But it's the only way. Elena's fingers trembled, and I could see the storm brewing in her heart, a tempest of loyalty to her son and the ancient beliefs of her ancestors. I watched as she fought the urge to turn back, to clutch at the threads of tradition that wove her world together like a fraying tapestry. I could feel the tension in the air, thick as fog on a moonless night, suffocating yet full of possibility. Outside, the voices of the village carried on the breeze, punctuated by laughter and the scent of roasting meat. They were oblivious to the turmoil, the swirling emotions in this little room where flesh met fear, where healing danced with horror. They would never understand the depths we plunged into, the sacrifices made under the guise of love and survival. Thomas's eyes flickered to the shadows in the corner, remnants of half-remembered fears, demons of superstition, ghosts of the past. You promise I'll be okay? His voice trembled, a fragile thread woven with the weight of his innocence. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat a reminder of every promise I'd ever broken. I promise, I said, though the word felt like a stone lodged deep within my chest, threatening to choke me. I could see Elena's eyes searching mine, a silent plea for reassurance, for strength that I strained to muster. But what did I know? I was just a healer, branded a surgeon by necessity, a title that rang hollow against the spectre of their fears. As I raised the blade, the room pulsed with an electric charge, a heartbeat of its own, the very air vibrating with uncertainty. I remembered my first incision, the sharpness of the blade biting into skin, the way life seemed to shriek and sing all at once, how I had felt like a god and a monster. Breathe, Thomas. Just breathe, I urged, my voice barely a whisper, swallowed by the silence. I could feel my heart racing, a wild stallion, thundering against the bars of my chest. I had seen this desperation before, the love of a mother, the fear of a child, the clash of ancient beliefs against the cold, hard reality of survival. The blade hovered over flesh, trembling as if sensing the weight of every soul that had faced this very moment throughout history. In that instant, I felt the echoes of those before me, ancient healers who carved hope into wounded bodies, warriors who had worn their scars like armor, and the patients who had faced the razor with unwavering courage. Do it, Thomas breathed, eyes locked onto mine, an intensity that shook me to my core. I wanted to scream, to flee, to throw down the knife and run into the safety of the village, but I couldn't. Not now. Not when he needed me to be brave. And so I pressed the blade against skin, the moment stretching into eternity. The world narrowed to that single point where fear met faith, where tradition collided with transformation. I could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on my shoulders, a cosmic alignment of all who had ever stood where I stood, blade in hand. Thomas gasped, a sound caught between pain and relief, and I could hear the whispers of the village rise like a tide outside the door, stories of healers and warriors, of gods and demons, woven together in a tapestry of anguish and hope. And in that moment, amidst the chaos and the cries, something shifted, a heartbeat, a promise, a connection forged in blood. With each incision, I felt the weight of Elena's gaze, the conflict swirling in her heart, a mother torn between her love and her belief. But I also felt the pulse of history in the air, the silent acknowledgement that surgery was not just a physical battle, but a cultural clash, a testament to the heart's relentless pursuit of life against the backdrop of death. I remember the echoes, the darkness of the room, and how time stood still, as if the universe held its breath, waiting for the next beat, the next decision. What would come after the final cut? Would the village whisper legends of the boy who survived, or would they tell tales of a mother who lost everything to the blade of a stranger? In that moment, I became part of their story, a thread woven into the very fabric of their existence. And as the blade cut deeper, so too did the understanding of what it meant to heal, not just the body, but the soul, the heart, the very essence of who we are. And in the shadows, the demons of belief and tradition danced restlessly, whispering their fears. But in the bright light of hope, another story began to unfold, a story of survival, of love, of a mother who would fight to her last breath. The air was thick with tension, and the world outside faded away, leaving only the heartbeat of this small room, the pulse of humanity caught between darkness and light, between despair and hope. The moment stretched on, and the story continued, a heartbeat echoing into the night. The room is alive with the sickening scream of the patient, a raw, visceral sound that pierces through the air and echoes off the damp stone walls. Blood splatters like a brutal brushstroke across the canvas of the surgeon's apron. I stand in the corner, paralyzed, heart racing as if it's trying to escape my chest. The flickering candlelight casts dancing shadows, grotesque figures mimicking the turmoil of the moment. This isn't a theater, it's a battlefield, a theater of horrors where life and death engage in a vicious tango. I remember the scent of iron, mingling with the faintest whiff of herbs, an ominous potpourri that hints at remedies and failures alike. A man named Ewan, heavy-set and weary, stares into the abyss of the unconscious patient's blade before him. His hands, trembling yet resolute, cradle the scalpel, a glimmering promise of hope and despair. I watch as he steels himself, the weight of lives resting on the edge of that blade. His eyes, once bright with ambition, now reflect the dark hollows of doubt. Just one cut, he murmurs, as if to himself, just one cut to save him. And then, there's Lyra, a woman with dreams too big for her small frame, her spirit a wildfire raging against the constraints of her world. She flits around the room, a whirlwind of urgency and grace, trying to salvage the dignity of both patient and surgeon. Yet beneath her fierce exterior, I sense the shatter of fear. She knows the risks, knows that one slip could turn savior into executioner. "We can't lose him, Ewan," she cries, her hands gripping his shoulders as if they could transfer her strength. I remember my own hands, trembling at the thought of life's fragility. The very act of being alive feels like a curse and a blessing, a riddle wrapped in flesh. Ewan's determination flickers, the tension is palpable, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. He glances at Lyra, and in that gaze, I see the ghosts of their past, the whispered secrets of late-night conversations and shared dreams of a future where they could heal rather than hurt. "Do you remember the time we tried to save that lamb?" Lyra's voice breaks through the chaos, a desperate attempt to ground them both in a memory that holds warmth. You said if we could just find the right herb, the right stitch, we could turn death away. But in this moment, all that clings to them is the spectre of mortality. The patient, a soldier whose life had been reduced to a tattered coat and a gaping wound, lies on the table, oblivion creeping in like a thief. Ewan's breath quickens, the blade glints ominously, a silver harbinger of what's to come. I remember, he chokes out, and in that admission, I feel the weight of every decision he's made, the failed surgeries and the ones that went well enough to grant solace. But sometimes, Lyra, the right herb isn't enough. Sometimes, we need to face the truth that not every life can be saved. The words hang in the air like a damning echo, and I shudder, the conviction throbbing between them like a heartbeat. The moment stretches, an eternity compressed into a heartbeat, and then Ewan takes a breath as if he's summoning the courage from the depths of despair. He leans closer, and I can see the glisten of his resolve. He might falter, but he won't break. The scalpel descends, slicing through the tension, threading the line between desperation and hope. Outside, the world is indifferent. Horses clip-clop on cobblestones, oblivious to the life-and-death struggle unfolding within these walls. An eerie calm blankets the street, contrasting sharply with the chaos inside. How easily life continues for some, while others teeter on the brink. In that dimly lit room, Lyra reaches for the herbs, fingers trembling. She glances at Ewan, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and dread. "If you believe, I'll find the right mixture. I'll do whatever it takes." Her promise hangs, heavy and electric, breathing life into the forgotten corners of the room. Every sound reverberates, the scraping of Ewan's knife against bone, the thud of Lyra's heart matching the rhythm of desperation. The patient stirs, the flicker of consciousness returning, and suddenly, it's not just a surgery, it's a reckoning. Each heartbeat pulses through the stone, a reminder of the fragility of existence, the thin veil between life and oblivion. "Stay with us," Lyra pleads, desperation lacing her voice. "We are here. Don't leave us." And in that moment, it's not just the soldier they're fighting for, it's every moment they've lived, every dream deferred, every hope shattered and built again. I remember my own fears crowding into that space, a cacophony of doubts and insecurities. What have I sacrificed for the sake of survival? What scars do I wear, both visible and hidden? The patient's eyes flicker open, a ghost of recognition swirling within them. Through the haze of pain, he sees not just a surgeon and a healer, but two souls wrestling with the weight of their own legacies, the echoes of medieval surgeries that sought to conquer death with rudimentary tools and unyielding hearts. "Will you remember me?" he breathes, voice cracking like the fragile glass of a forgotten relic. Ewan's gaze locks onto his. "Always," he swears, but it's more than a promise, it's a tether, a connection forged in blood, struggle, and shared humanity. And yet, I know this moment is fleeting, a whisper in the grand saga of life and death. What will linger is the lesson etched in their souls, a reminder that surgery, much like existence, is a dance on the razor's edge. As the blood spills and the heartbeats echo, I realize this is not merely about fixing what's broken. It's about understanding the fragility of life, the indomitable spirit of those who dare to wield a scalpel, believing against all odds that they can carve out hope from despair. They fight not just for one life, but for every life that has ever hung in balance, for every ghost that lingers in the shadows, waiting for a moment of clarity, a chance to be remembered.